Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto is summoned to DxD by Office to become her mate? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Stranger on the Shore. The world ended in a scream of light and sound. One moment, Naruto Uzumaki was a pillar of golden energy, a living sun holding back the deathly grasp of Kagaya Otsutsuki. The next, he was nothing but a passenger in a storm that had no name. The truth-seeking orbs, steadfast shields of black that could negate any ninjutsu, shattered like glass against the sheer, impossible pressure of collapsing dimensions. Sasuke was a blur of violet Susanoo, Kakashi a flicker of silver hair, Sakura a desperate cry lost in the roaring chaos. He reached for them, his chakra arms stretching, grasping at Fant. Ohms as space-time itself was shredded and rewoven into a tapestry of madness. Kurama, the nine-tailed fox, a being of pure, apocalyptic chakra who had known centuries of war and hatred, was silent within him. Not from fear, but from a profound, world-shaking awe. "This is beyond us, Naruto," the fox's voice rumbled in his mind, not a command or a warning, but a simple statement of fact. Hold on. Whatever happens, just hold on. Holding on was like trying to grip a fistful of lightning. The sensation was not of movement, but of dissolution. His body, fortified by the Sage of Six Paths himself, felt like it was being unmade. Atom by atom, colors he had never known bled through his vision. The deep purple of a dying star, the searing green of nascent life, the stark, empty white of a canvas before creation. He felt the crushing gravity of 1,000 worlds and the weightless drift of the void all at once. It was a cacophony of sensation, a symphony of oblivion, and he was its unwilling conductor. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The screaming silence was replaced by a singular, deafening crack, like the universe itself snapping in two. And then, there was only darkness. A deep, profound, and mercifully quiet darkness. He awoke to the gentle caress of water. It lapped at his boots, a soothing, rhythmic whisper against the shore. The first coherent thought that pierced the fog in his mind was one of simple, animalistic survival. Breathe. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and his lungs burned with the clean, sharp sting of salt. It was real. The air was real. He was alive. He pushed himself onto his elbows, his muscles screaming in protest. Every joint ached with a deep, grinding pain, as if he'd been crushed and then carelessly put back together. The sun was a brilliant, almost white disk in a sky of impossible blue, dotted with clouds so fluffy they looked like they'd been spun from cotton. He was lying on a beach of fine, pale sand that stretched in either direction, meeting a jungle so dense and vibrant it seemed to pulse with life. Towering trees with leaves the size of shields formed a solid wall of green, from which strange, multicolored birds shed themselves into the air with piercing calls. This was not the land of fire. This wasn't any of the elemental nations. The very feel of the world was different. He extended his senses, a familiar instinct honed in a lifetime of war. The natural energy here was wild, chaotic, and incredibly potent, but it was untamed. It felt different from the sage energy he knew, raw, like a river that had never known the guidance of a channel. Kurama, he sent out mentally, a tendril of panic tightening his chest. For a terrifying second, there was only silence. Then, a familiar, grumpy presence stirred in the vast, internal space of his mindscape. "I'm here, you idiot," the fox grumbled, though Naruto could feel the underlying relief in his partner's voice. "Barely. That little trip took more of us than fighting a god for 12 hours straight. What is this place?" "I don't know," Naruto admitted, pushing himself to a sitting position. He looked down at himself. His clothes were in tatters. The iconic orange jacket was shredded, hanging off his shoulders in burnt strips. The black undershirt was mostly gone, revealing the swirling seal on his stomach and a tapestry of old scars. His pants were torn, but intact. He was bruised, battered, but miraculously, nothing was broken. The potent healing factor granted by his Uzumaki blood and Kurama's chakra was already at work, knitting together torn muscle and sealing shallow cuts. He stood, his legs shaky for a moment before strength flooded back into them. He looked out at the ocean. It was a vast, unbroken expanse of turquoise water, so clear he could see the shadows of enormous fish moving beneath the surface. But it was the stillness that was most unsettling. There was no wind, none. The clouds hung motionless in the sky, and the surface of the water, despite the waves breaking on the shore, was as smooth as glass further out. It was unnatural, serene in a way that set his teeth on edge. "Where in the worlds are we?" he murmured aloud, his voice hoarse. He took a step towards the jungle, intending to find fresh water and get his bearings, when a flicker of movement in the periphery caught his eye. He froze. Instinct took over. His posture shifted, his center of gravity lowered, and his senses flared to life, every nerve ending tingling with Sage Mode's heightened awareness. He didn't activate the full transformation, he didn't need to. Even in his base state, he could feel the life force of the person hiding in the dense foliage. They were nervous, their heartbeat a rapid, thrumming rhythm like a trapped bird. But they were also trying to be stealthy, their breathing controlled. A hunter. He turned his head slowly, his blue eyes scanning the shadows of the jungle. He saw her, a young woman, crouched behind a broad-leafed fern. She was dressed in little more than a snakeskin bikini and a flowing cape. A massive, living snake was coiled around her waist, its head resting near her shoulder, flickering its tongue. In her hands, she held a bow. An arrow nocked and aimed directly at his heart. Her eyes were wide, a mixture of stark terror and intense, burning curiosity. Naruto had seen that look before, but never quite like this. It wasn't the look of an enemy sizing him up for a kill. It was the look of someone seeing something that their mind insisted could not possibly exist. He raised a hand slowly, palm open. A universal gesture of peace. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and even. "I'm not going to hurt you." The woman flinched at the sound of his voice, her knuckles whitening on the bowstring. She said something back, a string of sharp, melodic words in a language he had never heard. It was clear they had no way to communicate. He tried a different approach. He pointed to himself. "Naruto." He then pointed at her. An inquisitive look on his face. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. The snake at her waist hissed, a low, dangerous sound that vibrated through the humid air. She remained silent, her aim unwavering. Naruto sighed. This was going to be difficult. He could close the distance between them in a fraction of a second, disarm her before she could even release the arrow. He could create 1,000 clones and overwhelm her with sheer numbers. He could level half the jungle with a single Recentrican. But what would that accomplish? He was lost, alone, and injured. Making an enemy of the first person he met was monumentally stupid. So, he did the one thing she wouldn't expect. He dropped his hand and simply stood there, meeting her gaze without aggression. He let his posture relax, making it clear he was not a threat. He was tired, he was grieving the loss of his friends, and he was hopelessly lost. He had no energy for a pointless fight. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sounds were the lapping of the waves and the distant cry of the strange birds. The woman, Marguerite, was in a state of shock. The laws of her world, the sacred rules of Amazon Lily, were clear. If a man is found, he must be killed. It was the first lesson every Kuja warrior learned. Men were weak, vile, lustful creatures who brought only pain and suffering. Yet, the man standing before her was none of those things. He was tall, with hair the color of the sun and eyes as blue as the deepest sea. His body was a roadmap of scars, telling a story of countless battles. But it was his presence that was so unnerving. There was a power radiating from him, a deep, ancient strength that felt as vast and untamable as the ocean itself. And yet, he made no move. He simply watched her, his expression not of malice, but of weary patience. Her training screamed at her to shoot. Her instincts, however, were paralyzed by a profound sense of awe and a nascent curiosity she couldn't suppress. He wasn't looking at her with lust, as the old stories claimed all men did. He was looking at her like a person. Finally, her resolve wavered. She couldn't kill him, but she couldn't let him go. With a deep breath, she lowered her bow slightly and let out a sharp, piercing cry, a signal to her sisters. Naruto's head tilted. He heard the response almost instantly. The rustle of leaves, the thud of feet landing on soft earth. In seconds, the jungle seemed to come alive. From the shadows emerged more women, dozens of them. They were all tall, powerfully built, and armed to the teeth with spears, swords, and bows. They wore similar attire, and many had snakes coiled around their bodies as living weapons. They formed a semicircle around him, their weapons leveled, their faces a mixture of the same fear, hatred, and shock he'd seen on the first woman's face. An older woman with a stern face and a large, distinctive headdress stepped forward. She barked an order, and the woman with the bow, Marguerite, replied, gesturing towards Naruto. The exchange was tense, and all eyes were on him. Naruto kept his hands visible, his stance non-threatening. He could feel their killing intent, a palpable wave of hostility that washed over him. But beneath it, he also felt fear. Deep, ingrained fear. This wasn't the bloodlust of trained killers, it was the defensive terror of people protecting their home from an unknown invader. They're all women, Naruto, Kurama noted, his mental voice dry. Every single one of them. I'm not sensing a single male for miles. That information clicked into place, explaining their extreme reaction. An island of only women. His presence here was a violation of their entire society. Brute force was definitely the wrong answer. The stern-faced leader shouted something at him, her voice sharp and commanding. When he didn't respond, she grew impatient and gestured with her spear. Two warriors moved towards him cautiously, prodding him with the tips of their weapons. He didn't resist. Then, one of them grew bold. With a battle cry, she lunged, her spear aimed for his chest. The other warriors tensed, expecting a bloody conclusion. Naruto didn't move an inch. The spearhead, coated in a shimmering energy he now recognized as haki, flew towards his heart. Just as it was about to make contact, he shifted his weight. It was not a dodge, it was a movement so fluid and minimal it was almost imperceptible. The spear slid past his ribs, its wielder stumbling forward from the unexpected miss. Before she could recover, Naruto's hand shot out and gently tapped the shaft of her spear. A small, controlled pulse of chakra, no more than a spark, traveled down the wood. The woman's eyes went wide as the spear was ripped from her grasp and sent flying end over end, embedding itself deep into the trunk of a palm tree 50 feet away. A collective gasp went through the crowd of warriors. The leader's eyes narrowed. This was not the reaction of a weak, defenseless man. This was a display of casual, effortless power. Another warrior, seeing her comrade disarmed, attacked from his other side, swinging a large, flat-bladed sword in a deadly arc aimed at his neck. Naruto simply raised his hand and caught the blade between his thumb and forefinger. The sword stopped dead, the force of the blow dissipating with a soft hum. The warrior stared, her mouth agape, as she tried to pull her weapon free. It wouldn't budge. It was as if she were trying to pull it from solid stone. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto sent the sword spinning into the air. He caught it by the hilt and gently tossed it onto the sand at her feet. He hadn't taken a single step. He hadn't broken a sweat. And he hadn't harmed either of them. The Kuja warriors were frozen, their aggression momentarily forgotten in the face of such an impossible display. They were the elite fighters of Amazon Lily, masters of haki. Their attacks could shatter stone and fell sea kings. And this man had neutralized them as if they were children. The leader barked another order, her voice laced with a new urgency. This time, they all attacked at once. Arrows rained down from the sky, spears lunged for his vitals, and snakes shot forward like living whips. This time, Naruto moved. He vanished. To the Kuja, it was as if he had simply ceased to exist. One moment he was there, the next, only empty sand. Panic erupted. They spun around, searching for him, their senses screaming. A calm voice spoke from behind their leader. Enough. She whirled around, her heart pounding in her chest. He was standing right behind her, not even breathing heavily. He hadn't made a sound. How could anyone move that fast? It was impossible. He was a monster. A demon. Naruto looked at the terrified faces around him and sighed. This wasn't working. He needed to show them he meant no harm, and that required a different kind of strength. He raised his hands in the air, a clear sign of surrender. He deliberately relaxed his muscles, letting all the tension drain from his body. He looked at the leader, his blue eyes holding no malice, only a profound weariness and a desire for this confrontation to end. The women were stunned into silence. This powerful, demonic man, who could move faster than the eye could see and disarm them with a touch, was giving up. It made no sense. It was a trick. It had to be. The leader, Elder Nyan as she was known, stared at him, her ancient eyes trying to read his intentions. She had seen many things in her long life, but nothing like this. He was an anomaly, a contour. A diction of immense power and surprising gentleness. She made a decision, a risky one. She shouted a series of commands. The warriors, though hesitant, obeyed. They approached him slowly, this time with heavy, sea-stone chains. Naruto watched them come, his expression unreadable. He could break these chains with a twitch of his muscles. He could obliterate this entire army with a thought. But he knelt, allowing them to bind his wrists behind his back. The cold, heavy metal felt alien against his skin. It was a sign of trust, a gamble. He was betting that reason would prevail over fear. He was putting his fate in their hands to prove he was not their enemy. As they led him away from the beach and into the dense jungle, he could feel their gazes on his back. The hatred was still there, but now it was mixed with a grudging respect and a deep, unsettling confusion. Marguerite walked near the back of the group, her bow held loosely in her hand. She couldn't take her eyes off the stranger. His surrender was a greater show of strength than any feat of speed or power. It spoke of a confidence so absolute that chains and spears were utterly irrelevant. Who was this man, Naruto? What was he? The journey was long and silent. They marched him through the jungle, following a path worn smooth by generations of footsteps. The air grew thick and humid, filled with the scent of exotic flowers and damp earth. As they walked, Naruto focused, subtly expanding his sensory range. He sent out a handful of chakra-suppressed clones, shadow entities that melted into the trees and terrain, to scout ahead. The reports that came back to him were astounding. The island was massive, and teeming with life. And just as Kurama had said, there were no men. Not a single one. Just thousands upon thousands of women. He saw them in the trees. On patrol, their eyes following his procession with a mixture of shock and disgust. Finally, they emerged from the jungle, and Naruto's breath caught in his throat. Before him, carved into the heart of a colossal mountain, was a city. It was a breathtaking sight, a marvel of architecture that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural stone. Buildings in a distinct, serpentine style clung to the mountainside, connected by intricate bridges and winding staircases. A massive wall, guarded by more female warriors, encircled the city's base. As they passed through the main gate, a wave of noise washed over them. The entire city had turned out to see the impossible sight. Women and children lined the streets, their faces a mixture of emotions. Some pointed at, and shouted insults in their strange tongue. Others looked on with wide, curious eyes. Many clutched their children close, their faces masks of pure terror, as if he were a plague made manifest. Naruto ignored them all. He walked with his head held high, his gaze fixed forward. He was a prisoner, but he would not act like one. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the child of prophecy, the hero of Konoha. He had faced down gods and monsters. He would not be intimidated by fear and prejudice. His chains clinked with every step, a heavy, rhythmic counterpoint to the jeers of the crowd. He was being led to the heart of the city, to a grand arena built before a magnificent palace. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he was being taken to meet their leader. The Empress. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, a small group of Kuja warriors returned to the beach where the stranger had first appeared. Marguerite was among them, tasked by Elder Nyan to secure the A-Ray and search for any sign of a ship or other intruders. The area was quiet, too quiet. The usual cacophony of jungle nightlife was absent. No insects chirped, no nocturnal creatures stirred. An unnatural silence hung heavy in the air, thick and oppressive. Something's wrong, one of the warriors whispered, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Marguerite nodded, her eyes scanning the foliage. She walked towards the spot where Naruto had been standing. The sand was still disturbed from the brief confrontation. But it was the jungle's edge that drew her attention. A patch of vegetation, about 20 feet in diameter, was wrong. The vibrant green leaves of the ferns and palms were a sickly, ashen gray. The soil beneath them was dark and crumbly, like old charcoal. Cautiously, she knelt down and reached out to touch the leaf of a large plant. The moment her fingers made contact, the leaf disintegrated, crumbling into a fine, gray dust that drifted away on the non-existent breeze. She recoiled, her eyes wide with horror. She tried another plant, and then another. The result was the same. The life had been sucked out of them, leaving behind nothing but fragile, dead husks. The ground itself felt cold, unnaturally so, leaching warmth from the soles of her sandals. There was no smell of decay, no scent of anything at all. It was a zone of absolute nothingness, a scar of emptiness on the vibrant, living island. This was where he had landed. This blight, this touch of death, had appeared with him. The fear she had felt earlier returned with a vengeance, colder and sharper than before. The man, Naruto, was more than just a powerful stranger. He was an omen, and she feared, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that he had not come alone. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Serpent's Gaze. The arena was a vast, circular pit carved from the living stone of the mountain, its floor of packed earth stained dark by the blood of countless beasts and the occasional unlucky pirate. High walls sloped upwards to meet a series of tiered spectator stands, which were now filled with the entire population of Amazon Lily. A sea of female faces, 1,000 copies of fear, anger, and morbid curiosity. All stared down at the lone figure in the center of the pit. Naruto stood with his hands still bound behind him, the sea stone chains a heavy, cold weight. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting a dramatic, blood-red light over the arena. He ignored the jeers and the hateful shouts raining down from the stands. He'd faced worse crowds. He remembered the cold stares of his own villagers, the whispers that followed him like a shadow, the loneliness of a childhood spent as a pariah. This was nothing new. He kept his breathing even, his senses sharp, extending his awareness not just across the arena, but through the entire city. He felt the life force of every woman and child, a complex web of emotion and energy. And he felt the three strongest signatures approaching. A hush fell over the crowd as a figure emerged onto a royal balcony carved into the mountainside directly overlooking the arena. She was, without question, the most beautiful woman Naruto had ever seen. Tall and statuesque, with impossibly long black hair, a flawless face, and a figure that could make statues weep. She carried herself with an air of absolute, unshakable authority. A massive, white snake with red markings was coiled around her, serving as a living throne. This was the Snake Empress, Boa Hancock. At her side stood two other women, nearly as tall and imposing as she was. One was heavy-set with green hair, the other slender with a mane of dark, wild hair. They looked down at him with undisguised contempt. Hancock's voice, amplified by the arena's acoustics, cut through the silence. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience, cold and imperious. She spoke in her native tongue, her words a condemnation. Naruto didn't need to understand the language to grasp the meaning. He was a man, an intruder. His existence was a crime. His sentence was death. He met her gaze across the distance, his blue eyes unwavering. He saw the arrogance, the power, the breathtaking beauty. But beneath it all, his sage's senses picked up something else, a faint, discordant tremor. An old, deep-seated pain, so well hidden it was almost imperceptible. A familiar ache of trauma. Down in the pit, a gate ground open, and Hancock's two sisters, Sandersonia and Marigold, stepped onto the sand. They moved with a predatory grace, their large bodies belying their speed. "You face the Gorgon sisters," a voice announced from the stands. It was the old woman from the beach, Elder Nyan, acting as a reluctant translator. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "For the crime of being a man on this sacred island, you will be executed." Sandersonia, the lankier of the two, laughed, a high, cruel sound. "We will turn your bones to dust," she hissed, her tongue flicking out like a serpent's. Marigold cracked her knuckles, a sound like stone grinding against stone. "It will be a pleasure to erase your filthy presence from our sight." Naruto finally spoke, his voice calm and clear, easily carrying across the arena. He addressed Elder Nyan. "Tell them I don't want to fight." Nyan translated, her expression grim. Sandersonia's sneer only widened. "He begs for his life." How typical of a weak male. "I'm not begging," Naruto corrected, his gaze still fixed on the sisters. "I'm giving you a choice. Let me go, and no one gets hurt. I'll find my own way off this island and you'll never see me again." The sheer audacity of his statement, a chained prisoner offering terms to his executioners, stunned the crowd into a brief silence, which was quickly followed by a wave of enraged shouting. Hancock leaned forward on her snake throne, her dark eyes narrowed to slits. The arrogance of this man was infuriating. "He has sealed his fate," Hancock declared. "Sisters, kill him." With that final command, the battle began. Sandersonia was a blur of motion, her body weaving and swaying as she shot towards him, her hair molding into the shape of striking snake heads. Marigold was a juggernaut of power. Her fists coated in shimmering armament hockey as she charged head-on, aiming to pulverize him with a single blow. Naruto sighed. He'd given them their chance. With a simple flex of his muscles, the sea stone chains binding his wrists didn't just break, they vaporized. The links exploded outwards with a sharp crack, turning to dust before they could even hit the ground. The crowd gasped. The Gorgon sisters faltered for a half-step, their eyes wide with disbelief. That half-step was all he needed. He flowed around Marigold's devastating punch, the wind from her hockey-clad fist whistling past his ear. He didn't counter. He simply moved, placing a hand gently on her back as he passed. He pushed, not with force, but with a perfect redirection of her own momentum. The larger woman, expecting to hit an immovable object, found only air and a guiding pressure. She stumbled forward, her charge carrying her uncontrollably across the arena until she crashed into the far wall with a resounding boom. At the same time, Sandersonia's snake hair attack struck where he had been standing. He was no longer there. He was behind her, his movements silent and fluid. "Your attacks are too predictable," he said, his voice a low murmur directly beside her ear. She spun around with a shriek of rage, her body contorting. She was fast, incredibly so, but to Naruto's senses, she was moving through molasses. He saw every muscle twitch, every shift in her center of gravity, every flicker of hockey before it was even fully formed. He ducked under a sweeping kick, sidestepped a serpent-like jab, and weaved through a flurry of strikes, his hands clasped casually behind his back. He was a leaf on the wind, untouched by the storm of her assault. It was an absolute, effortless, and utterly humiliating display of defensive mastery. From the royal balcony, Hancock's composure began to crack. She watched, her perfect lips parted in disbelief, as her powerful sisters, renowned warriors who could defeat sea kings, were being made to look like clumsy children. The man wasn't even fighting back. He was playing with them. "Stop moving and fight me," Sandersonia screamed, her frustration boiling over into pure fury. She leapt back, her body undergoing a grotesque transformation. Her jaw unhinged, her form elongating, until she stood before him as a massive lamia, half woman, half gargantuan snake. The crowd roared with approval, certain this would be the end. This was the moment that changed everything. As Sandersonia's form expanded, the simple cloth of her dress tore. For a split second, a mark on her lower back was exposed to the entire arena. Naruto's eyes, sharpened by sage mode, saw it with perfect clarity. A burned, ugly scar. A symbol branded into her flesh. The hoof of the soaring dragon. The mark of a celestial dragon's slave. His demeanor shifted in an instant. The casual, almost bored calm vanished, replaced by a cold, searing rage that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire arena. His eyes, once a calm blue, blazed with an inner, golden light. Kurama, sensing his partner's fury, stirred within him, adding a feral, crimson edge to his aura. In that fraction of a second, Naruto didn't see a monster trying to kill him. He saw a girl with a slave brand on her back. He saw the years of torment, humiliation, and pain that Mark represented. He saw his own past, the loneliness, the brand of the Jinchuriki, the feeling of being less than human. And his soul roared. Sandersonia, in her powerful snake form, lunged, her massive jaws gaping to swallow him whole. But Naruto was faster. He moved, not to dodge, not to attack, but to position his own body directly between her exposed back and the thousands of watching eyes in the stands. He stood there, a human shield, his back to the crowd, his face a mask of protective fury. His action was so unexpected, so bizarre, that Sandersonia froze mid-strike, her attack faltering. Why would he do that? Why would he protect her from the gazes of her own people? He spoke, his voice low and dangerously quiet. No one should have to show that to the world if they don't want to. Elder Nyan, from her perch, translated his words. Her voice trembling slightly. A wave of confusion rippled through the stands. Hancock's breath hitched. She knew that mark. She and her sisters shared it. It was their deepest, most guarded secret. A source of unimaginable shame. And this man, this stranger, had just shielded it from view. Marigold, having recovered, charged again, her body now also transformed into a massive snake-like form. "What have you done to my sister?" she roared. Naruto didn't turn. "I've done nothing," he said, his eyes still locked on Sandersonia. He met her confused, reptilian gaze. "I'm not your enemy." He then clapped his hands together. Sage art. Amphibian technique. The ground beneath the two giant sisters suddenly turned slick and frictionless, like ice coated in oil. Their massive, powerful bodies were now a liability. They slid and slipped, unable to find any purchase, their movements becoming clumsy and comical. Before they could comprehend what was happening, Naruto appeared before each of them in a flicker of yellow light, a Rasengan swirling in his hand. He didn't strike them with it. He pressed the spinning orbs of chakra gently against their foreheads. The vortex of energy didn't tear their flesh. Instead, it induced an overwhelming wave of vertigo. Their minds spun, the world dissolving into a nauseating blur. Their giant forms collapsed, reverting to their human shapes as they fell to the ground, unconscious but completely unharmed. Silence. A deep, profound, and absolute silence fell over the arena. The entire nation of Kuja warriors stared, utterly speechless. He had defeated the Gorgon sisters without landing a single true blow, and his final act had been one of incomprehensible compassion. Naruto stood over their unconscious forms for a moment before turning his gaze back to the royal balcony. He looked directly at Boa Hancock, his eyes still holding the embers of that protective rage. He had won. According to their rules, he should be free. Hancock was shaking, not from fear, but from a maelstrom of emotions she couldn't process. This man had defied every law of her reality. He was strong, impossibly so. But he was also kind. His final act wasn't one of a victor gloating over his defeated foes. It was an act of profound, empathetic dignity. He had protected her sister's shame. It was a gesture so alien, so contradictory to everything she believed about men, that her mind recoiled. Her pride, the impenetrable fortress she had built around her broken heart, reasserted itself. She would not be undone by this thing. She would show him true power. She stood, striking a pose of alluring dominance, and placed her hands on her hips, leaning back. How dare you?" she stammered, her voice losing its usual commanding tone. "You think you can defeat my sisters and look upon me with such eyes? You will pay for your insolence." She formed a heart with her hands. "I will forgive you," she said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity. "Only because your ignorance will be your end. For my beauty will turn you to stone." Marrow mellow. A wide, heart-shaped beam of pink energy shot from her hands, flying towards Naruto. It was her ultimate power. The ability of the love fruit. Any who looked upon her with even a trace of luster and pure thoughts would be instantly petrified. No man had ever been able to resist it. The beam washed over Naruto. He stood perfectly still, making no attempt to dodge. The pink light enveloped him, and the entire crowd held its breath, waiting for the man to turn to cold, hard stone. And nothing happened. The light faded, revealing Naruto standing in the exact same spot, completely unaffected. He blinked once, a look of genuine confusion on his face. "What was that supposed to do?" he asked. The world stopped. Boa Hancock's mind went utterly, completely blank. He resisted. He wasn't stone. He wasn't even phased. Did he not feel lust? Did he have no evil thoughts? Was he blind? Was he not a man at all? The foundations of her power, her identity, and her worldview crumbled into dust in that single, impossible moment. She stared at him, her mouth agape, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs. Naruto just looked back, his expression one of polite curiosity. He had no lust in his heart for her. He saw her beauty, but it was like admiring a painting or a sunset. His mind was a fortress forged in war and loss, his heart still belonged to the memory of his own world, his own friends. Her power, based on an emotion he did not feel for her, had no purchase. "I believe I've won," he said, his voice calm but firm, echoing through the silent arena. "I'm not your enemy. All I want is to find my way home." Hancock couldn't speak. She couldn't move. She could only stare at the impossible man who had defeated her sisters without cruelty, protected her family's shame, and stood unbowed before her ultimate power. For the first time since she was a child, the Snake Empress of Amazon Lily had no idea what to do. Out of sheer, unadulterated shock, she granted him a temporary stay. She needed to understand. She needed to know what he was. Later that night, as the island nation buzzed with whispered rumors about the mysterious man, a monstrous shriek echoed from the coastline. A sea king, larger than any they had seen in years, had launched a mindless, frenzied attack on the harbor. Its eyes were a milky, vacant white, and its flesh was cold and dead to the touch, even as it thrashed with unnatural strength. Before the Kuja's defenses could even fully mobilize, a flash of gold erupted from the city. Naruto, having sensed the commotion, appeared on the water's surface. He held a spiraling, shrieking vortex of wind and chakra in his hand. With a single, explosive throw, the wind style, Rasenshuriken hit the beast, and the creature simply disintegrated in a silent, cellular storm. The Kuja on the docks stared in awe at his power. But inside his mindscape, Kurama grunted, a feeling of deep unease settling over him. "Naruto," the great fox rumbled, his voice grim. "That Sea King, its life force, it was hollow. Like an empty shell." Naruto stood on the calm water of the calm belt, looking at the spot where the monster had been. The same feeling, just like that patch of dead jungle where he had landed. A touch of emptiness, a creeping, silent void. He had won his life and his freedom for the day, but a deep, cold dread began to settle in his heart. He was beginning to realize that the dimensional tear might have read more than just him to this strange new world. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Jungle. A fragile, unspoken truce settled over Amazon Lily. Naruto was no longer a prisoner, but he was far from a guest. He was an enigma, a walking contradiction housed in a stone lodge near the base of the city mountain, a location chosen for its comfort and its defensibility. He was watched constantly. Kuja warriors, perched on rooftops and in the shadows of archways, followed his every move, their arrows never far from their bowstrings. The general populace gave him a wide berth, whispering behind their hands as he passed. Their initial terror now curdled into a wary, resentful curiosity. Hancock, the empress whose word was law, had sequestered herself in the highest chambers of her palace. She issued no new edicts concerning the man. She simply watched. This inaction was, in itself, a source of immense confusion and anxiety for her subjects. The Snake Empress was not known for her indecisiveness. Naruto understood his precarious position. He was a foreign body in a closed system, and the system didn't know whether to expel him or absorb him. For the first few days, he did little, using the time to heal and allow his chakra reserves to recover their full depth after the dimensional ordeal. He sat for hours in quiet meditation, his senses spread thin across the island, learning its rhythms, its energies, its inhabitants. He felt the thrum of life in the vibrant jungle, the steady pulse of the city, and the chaotic, swirling emotions of the thousands of women around him. Fear was the dominant note, but beneath it, he sensed intrigue. He was the ultimate unknown, and that was a powerful lure. He knew he couldn't stay passive forever. Waiting for these people to decide his fate was not his style. He needed information, a map of this new reality he'd been thrown into. There was only one person on the island who seemed to possess the wisdom and pragmatism to provide it. He found Elder Nyan tending to a small garden of medicinal herbs on a terrace overlooking the city. The old woman didn't look up as he approached, her gnarled fingers expertly pruning a flowering vine. "He guards are supposed to announce visitors," she said, her voice dry as old parchment. "Or at least try to stop them." Naruto stopped a respectful distance away. "They saw me coming. I think they were too scared to get in the way." Nyan finally looked up, her sharp eyes appraising him. "They have good reason to be." You humiliate the Gorgon sisters and defy the Empress in the same afternoon. In the history of Amazon Lily, no one has ever done such a thing and lived to see the next sunset. Yet here you are, breathing my air. I don't want to be anyone's enemy, Naruto said, his tone simple and direct. I'm lost. I need to understand where I am. The old woman grunted, turning back to her plants. You are in the calm belt. A strip of ocean on either side of the Grand Line where the wind never blows and the waters are a breeding ground for the largest sea kings. This island, Amazon Lily, is a sanctuary, a nation of women hidden from a world that would see us enslaved or destroyed. Naruto sat cross-legged on the stone floor, a gesture of deference that did not go unnoticed by Nyan. Grand Line, world government, I've heard your people mention these things. And so, the lessons began. Over the next several days, they met in that garden, the scent of herbs filling the air as Nyan sketched out the broad strokes of his new reality. She spoke of a world of endless blue, of the 4GR. Each seas and the treacherous ribbon of chaos that circled the globe, the Grand Line. She told him of the world government, a monolithic entity that ruled with an iron fist, and its military arm, the Marines. She explained the delicate, violent balance of power held by the 4 emperors, the Yonko, who ruled the second half of the Grand Line like kings, and the Shichibukai, the 7 warlords of the sea. Our empress, Boa Hancock, is one of them, Nyan explained, her voice low. A warlord, a pirate who, in exchange for a full pardon of her crimes, occasionally lends her strength to the world government. It is that title alone that keeps the marine warships from our shores. A title that is contingent on the world believing she despises all men and would never suffer one to live on her island. She gave him a pointed look. Your continued existence here is a political time bomb that could obliterate our nation. Naruto listened, absorbing every word. It was a world of pirates and marines, of strange powers and a brutal, overarching authority. In turn, he offered his own story, simplified for her understanding. He spoke of a land far away, a different world, comprised of hidden villages and warriors called shinobi who commanded an energy called chakra. He spoke of a great war, of a battle against a being who was less a person and more a force of nature. He didn't speak of the Tentai, LS or the Sage of 6 Paths. Such concepts were too alien, but he conveyed the scale of the conflict, the loss, and the accident that had brought him here. Nyan listened with the stoic patience of one who had seen a great many impossible things in her life. A man from another world was hardly stranger than a man made of rubber or a skeleton that could talk. This energy, this chakra, she said one afternoon. It allows you to do more than just move quickly and hit hard. When you fought the sisters, you made the ground slick. When you faced the Sea King, you created a storm of wind in your hand. Chakra is the combination of spiritual and physical energy, Naruto explained. Every living thing has it. Most just don't know how to access or control it. Your haki, it feels similar. Like an instinctual, raw form of the same thing. He focused, allowing a small, blue orb of chakra to form in the palm of his hand, a basic Rasengan, stable and contained. You push your energy out to coat your fists or to sense others. We mold it, shape it, give it an elemental nature. Nyan stared at the swirling sphere, her ancient eyes wide with a flicker of something that looked like academic fascination. Incredible, she whispered. To give energy form and purpose like that, it is an art we have never conceived of. While Nyan was his source for lore and politics, his bridge to the Kuja people came. In a much more reluctant form, Marguerite. The young woman who had first found him on the beach was officially assigned to be his keeper. She brought him his meals, her movements stiff and wary, always keeping her bow within arm's reach. Naruto, sensing her fear, made a point of being utterly disarming. He would thank her profusely for the food, a simple act of gratitude that clearly flustered her. He'd ask about the strange, delicious fruits, or the name of a particular bird whose song he liked. He asked about her. Was she always a guard? Was she a good hunter? He spoke to her not as his jailer, but as a person. Slowly, painstakingly, the walls of her ingrained fear began to show cracks. The breakthrough came one afternoon in the training grounds. Naruto was watching a group of younger warriors practicing their archery. They were skilled, their arrows flying fast and true. Marguerite was among them, her form perfect. He watched as she took a deep breath, her brow furrowed in concentration. The arrowhead beside her shimmered with a faint, black energy, armament hockey. She drew her bow, the string groaning under the tension, and released. The arrow flew with incredible force, shattering the stone target at the far end of the range. It was an impressive display, but the effort left her breathing heavily, sweat beading on her forehead. The next arrow she fired had no such coating. Her control was inconsistent, the technique draining. Later, as she brought him his evening meal, he broached the subject. "That was amazing, what you did with the arrow," he said honestly. "But it takes a lot out of you, doesn't it?" Marguerite bristled, immediately defensive. "It is a difficult technique." "It doesn't have to be," he replied gently. "You have the power. You're just using a sledgehammer when you need a paintbrush. You force all the energy out at once, but you don't guide it." She looked at him, suspicion warring with curiosity. "And you know a better way?" He smiled. "Maybe. Show me your hand." Hesitantly, she held out her palm. He plucked a single leaf from a nearby bush and placed it in the center. "Forget about power," he said. "Forget about hitting something. Just focus on the energy inside you. Don't push it out. Feel it. Coax it to the surface. Try to make this leaf stick." She stared at him as if he were insane. "Stick? How?" "With your energy, your haki, your chakra, whatever you want to call it. Just a little bit, a continuous, gentle flow." Marguerite scoffed, but, to her own surprise, she tried. She closed her eyes and concentrated, trying to replicate the feeling of coating her arrows. The leaf immediately blew off her hand. She tried again, and the leaf shot off like it had been flicked. Frustration mounted on her face. A few other young warriors, including a tall girl named Aphilandra and a shorter one called Sweetpea, had stopped their own training to watch, snickering from a distance. "You're trying too hard," Naruto coached, his voice patient. It reminded him of teaching Konohamaru the Rasengan, of the long, frustrating hours that finally led to a breakthrough. "It's like trying to hold water in a clenched fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more you lose. Relax. Let it flow." Quote. Marguerite took a deep, calming breath, remembering his effortless movements in the arena. He hadn't used brute force. He had flowed. She opened her eyes, looked at the leaf, and this time, she didn't try to do anything. She just focused. She imagined a tiny, gentle stream of energy flowing from her center, up her arm, and into her palm. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the leaf trembled. It lifted a millimeter, then settled back down, clinging to her skin. Her eyes shot wide open. She tilted her hand. The leaf stayed put. She turned her hand completely upside down. The leaf remained, defying gravity. A wide, incredulous grin spread across her face, followed by a triumphant laugh that echoed through the training ground. I did it." Aphilandra and Sweetpea stopped laughing, their jaws hanging open. They looked at each other, then scrambled to pick up their own leaves, their earlier mockery forgotten in a wave of competitive fascination. That single, simple act shifted public opinion more than his battle in the arena ever could. Defeating the Gorgon sisters was an act of monstrous power that inspired fear. Teaching one of them a new law, why to control her own power, was an act of generosity that inspired something far more dangerous to their old way of thinking: hope. He wasn't just a threat, he was a resource. From her high window, Hancock watched it all. She saw the man, Naruto, patiently coaching Marguerite. She saw the moment the leaf stuck. She saw the pure, unadulterated joy on Marguerite's face, a joy that was quickly spreading to the other girls now clamoring for his attention. And she felt a hot, unfamiliar pang in her chest. It was a venomous cocktail of anger at his audacity, envy of the easy way he connected with her people, and a terrifying, magnetic pull towards the very kindness he represented. Her mind kept flashing back to the arena, to the moment he had stood, his back to the entire world, to shield her sister's most shameful secret. Men were supposed to be selfish, cruel, and dominating. They took what they wanted and gloried in the weakness of others. That was the lesson the world nobles had burned into her soul. Yet this man had used his strength to protect their weakness. He had seen their deepest shame and had not recoiled in disgust or mocked them with contempt. He had shielded it. It was an act so fundamentally at odds with her understanding of the world that it threatened to tear her sanity apart. Sandersonia and Marigold entered her chambers, their expressions troubled. They had recovered physically, but the mental shock of their defeat lingered. "Sister," Sandersonia began, her voice unusually quiet. "The man, he is teaching the younger warriors." "I have eyes," Hancock snapped, turning from the window. Her composure a fragile mask. "He could have killed us," Sandersonia continued, touching her forehead where the phantom sensation of his Rasengan still lingered. "He could have humiliated us further. But he didn't. When he saw the mark, he protected me." Hancock flinched as if struck. "He is a man. It is a trick. He seeks to lull us into a false sense of security before he shows his true, vile nature." But even as she spoke the words, they tasted like ash in her mouth. She didn't believe them. Not anymore. The whispers in the jungle were growing louder. While Naruto W. as busy building tentative bridges within the city walls, hunting parties were returning from the deep wilds with increasingly disturbing tales. The dead zones, those patches of ashen, lifeless gray, were spreading. They were no longer isolated spots but were beginning to connect, forming a web of creeping decay that was strangling the island's vibrant life force. Worse, the animals were becoming unnervingly coordinated. A patrol was ambushed not by a single predator, but by a concerted attack from a pack of tigers, a flock of venomous birds, and a swarm of giant insects, all striking at the same time from different directions. A display of cross-species strategy that was utterly unnatural. The beasts fought with a terrifying ferocity, their eyes holding a dull, vacant sheen. When one was finally killed, a warrior reported that its body felt cold and hollow, its life force gone long before its heart had stopped beating. Naruto heard these reports from Marguerite, who now spoke to him with a comfortable familiarity. As she described the hollowed-out animals and the dead zones, a cold knot formed in his stomach. "It's the same energy, or lack thereof, from that Sea King," Kurama confirmed, his mental voice a low growl. "Whatever that thing is, it's not just a passing anomaly. It's an infection. It's feeding on this island." That evening, Marguerite brought him a platter of roasted lizard and fruit. The sun had set, and the jungle had come alive with the sounds of its nocturnal inhabitants, though the sounds seemed more strained, more frantic, than they had a few days ago. "You seem sad," she observed, sitting a comfortable distance from him. "Just thinking about my home," he admitted, his gaze distant. He told her a little about Konoha, about its bustling streets, the faces carved into the mountain. The feeling of community. He spoke of his teammates, Sasuke and Sakura, and his master, Kakashi. A profound melancholy colored his voice, a vulnerability he had not shown to anyone else here. It made him seem less like a demigod of power and more like a lost young man. As he spoke, he felt a familiar, intense gaze from above. He looked up, past the rooftops and training grounds, to the highest balcony of the palace. He could just make out her silhouette against the torchlight of her chambers. Hancock was watching them. His sage's senses could feel the storm of her emotions, confusion, anger, and a flicker of something else, something softer and more fragile. He met her gaze across the distance. He didn't smile or wave. He simply held her stare, a silent acknowledgement that he knew she was there. That he saw her, not just as an empress, but as another soul in turmoil. For a long moment, the two of them, the stranded shinobi and the isolated empress, were locked in that silent communication. Then, Hancock abruptly turned and swept back into her chambers, the silhouette vanishing from the balcony. Naruto looked away from the empty palace and out towards the darkening jungle. The whispers were growing into a scream. He now had people here, tentative friends, curious students, who were in the path of a creeping, silent threat he had inadvertently led to their doorstep. He was no longer just a stranger. He was a guardian, and his new watch was just beginning. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Corrupted Heart. The days settled into a strange new rhythm on Amazon Lily. The sun would rise, and with it, the sounds of the city waking, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the chatter of merchants in the marketplace, the sharp thwack of arrows hitting practice targets. For a few hours each afternoon, a crowd of younger warriors would gather in the main training grounds, and Naruto would join them. The initial fear that had surrounded him was transmuting, day by day, into a kind of celebrity. He was still the man, the outsider, but he was also the teacher. He had started with the basics. The leaf-sticking exercise, which had once seemed like a miracle to Marguerite, was now a simple warm-up. He had them walking up the sheer stone walls of the arena, their feet adhering to the surface with precise chakra control. At first, there were shrieks of panic followed by undignified tumbles. But soon, shrieks of laughter and triumph filled the air as they raced each other up the vertical inclines. He was teaching them to walk on water in the city's large cisterns. A skill he presented as essential for any warrior of the sea. Marguerite, Aphilandra, and Sweetpea were his star pupils, their natural talent and hockey control giving them a head start. They absorbed his lessons like sponges. And the results were immediate and dramatic. Their archery became more precise, their hockey-infused attacks more sustainable, their movements more fluid. They were learning to blend the raw, outward force of hockey with the subtle, internal discipline of chakra. Boa Hancock watched it all from her palace balcony, a gilded cage of her own making. The sight of her warriors laughing and running up walls under the tutelage of a man sent a confusing jolt through her. It was a violation of every sacred law of the Kuja. It should have been blasphemy. But she could not deny the results. Her warriors were becoming stronger, more versatile. And they were happy. She saw a joy and camaraderie in their training that was different from the harsh, brutal discipline she had always enforced. It was a collaborative strength, not a competitive one. The source of it all was him. Naruto. He never raised his voice. He was patient, encouraging, and possessed an infectious optimism that seemed to be slowly seeping into the very stones of her city. The venomous jealousy in her heart was still there, but it was being diluted by a grudging, terrifying admiration. Not everyone shared the younger generation's enthusiasm. Among the veteran warriors, the old guard who had fought to protect Amazon Lily for decades, suspicion festered. They saw Naruto not as a teacher, but as a contamination. A foreign disease weakening the traditions that had kept them safe. None felt this more keenly than Kiyomi. She was a master of the Kuja fighting arts, a warrior whose spear had tasted the blood of countless pirates and beasts. Her hockey was strong, her will unbending. She saw the younger warriors fawning over the outsider, abandoning their traditional spear and sword drills for his strange, chakra, tricks. And her pride curdled into a bitter resentment. She saw their laughter as a mockery of the true strength that came from discipline and sacrifice. They have forgotten what it is to be Kuja, she spat one afternoon. Watching from the upper tiers as Naruto demonstrated how to create a string of shadow clones. He makes them weak, dependent on his parlor tricks. Her friends murmured in agreement, their eyes hard as they watched the man who had so effortlessly defeated their strongest fighters. Kiyomi's resentment became an obsession. She needed to prove that the old ways were superior. That true Kuja strength, honed through generations of hardship, was infinitely greater than whatever bizarre power this outsider possessed. She would venture into the deepest, most dangerous part of the jungle. A place where the beasts were older and far more cunning. She would return with the head of an ancient hydra, a trophy so magnificent it would remind everyone of what a true warrior looked like. It would be a silent, undeniable rebuke to the golden-haired man and his growing cult of followers. She set out at dawn, alone, her favorite spear in hand. She pushed deeper into the jungle than she had in years, past the familiar hunting grounds and into the primeval heart of the island. The air grew thick and heavy, the trees forming a dense canopy that plunged the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. But as she tracked the hydra, she began to notice the wrongness. The unnatural silence. The dead zones. They were larger here, great swaths of ashen decay that felt open wounds on the living body of the island. The air within them was cold, carrying a profound stillness that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She found the hydra's lair in a cave system at the base of a waterfall. But the beast was already dead. Its massive, multi-headed corpse was sprawled on the ground, but there were no signs of a fight. Its flesh was cold and gray, its eyes milky and vacant. It looked as if its very life force had been drained away, leaving behind an empty, reptilian husk. The same hollowness she'd heard whispers of from the other hunting parties. Frustration and a creeping dread warred within her. Denied her trophy, she turned to leave, but as she stepped out of the cave, she found herself in the largest dead zone she had yet seen. The entire basin around the waterfall was a landscape of gray dust and crumbling, skeletal trees. And in the center of it, Hovering just above the dead earth, was a wisp of shadow. It was a tear in the world, a small patch of darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. It pulsed, faintly, like a dying heart. Kiyomi froze, her warrior's instinct screaming at her. This was the source of the decay. This was the infection. She raised her spear, coating it in a thick layer of armament haki. But before she could attack, the shadow moved. It didn't rush her. It drifted, slowly, deliberately. And it spoke, not with a voice, but in her mind. A whisper of pure, chilling thought that bypassed her ears and slid directly into her consciousness. Strong, it whispered, the thought cold and ancient. You are strong, but you are unseen, overlooked. Your strength is wasted. Kiyomi's breath hitched. The voice was stroking her deepest, most secret insecurities. They flocked to the new power. The false light, the shadow continued. Its presence drawing nearer, the air growing colder. They have forgotten you. They have forgotten what true strength is. But I see it. I see the fire in your heart. The pride, the anger. What are you? She demanded, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and defiance. I am a key, the voice whispered. I can unlock the power you already possess. The power they are too blind to see. Together, we can remind them. We can show them what a true Kuja warrior is. We can purge the male filth from this island and restore its honor. It was everything she wanted to hear. The words were a balm on her wounded pride. A validation of her bitter resentment. She knew, on some level, that this was wrong. This was a dark, unholy thing. But its offer was too seductive. The promise of power, of recognition, of restoring what she saw as the tarnished honor of her people, it was irresistible. She lowered her spear, just for a second, her resolve wavering. And in that second, the shadow lunged. It didn't touch her. It flowed into her, a wave of absolute cold that extinguished the fire in her heart and replaced it with a frozen, burning rage. She gasped, her body arching in agony as the thing latched onto her very soul. Its tendrils sinking deep into her resentment, her jealousy, her pride, and feeding on them, amplifying them 1,000-fold. Her vision blurred, and the last thing she saw with her own eyes was the vibrant green of the distant, living jungle turning to a muted, hateful gray. She returned to the city at dusk. The guards at the gate saw her coming and hailed her, but she did not respond. She walked with a stiff, unnatural gait, her head held at an odd angle. As she passed through the gate, the vibrant flowers that grew along the wall withered and turned to dust. The guards recoiled, a sudden, inexplicable chill washing over them. They saw her eyes. The warm, brown eyes of their sister in arms were gone, replaced by orbs of milky, vacant white. Her haki, once a familiar and powerful presence, was now a spiky, malevolent aura of black energy that radiated a palpable cold, sapping the strength and warmth from everything around it. She was no longer Kiyomi. She was a vessel, a puppet of the void, animated by a twisted echo of her own hatred. She ignored the shouts of the guards and marched directly towards the training grounds. It was empty now, the evening meal having drawn everyone away. The place was a symbol of his influence. It had to be purged. She raised her spear, and a wave of black, cold energy shot forth, striking the wooden practice dummies. They didn't break or splinter. They aged a century in a second, turning to gray, rotten wood that crumbled into dust. A cry of alarm went up. Warriors began to pour into the grounds, their weapons drawn. Kiyomi, what are you doing? The thing wearing Kiyomi's face turned its head, a slow, creaking motion. It saw Marguerite among the crowd, her bow already in her hand, her face a mask of horrified confusion. The favorite, the voice of the null whispered in the ruin of Kiyomi's mind. The first to be corrupted by the outsider. She will be the first to be cleansed. With a feral shriek, she was a horrifying mix of Kiyomi's voice and a grating, otherworldly static, the corrupted warrior lunged. She moved with a terrifying, unnatural speed, her spear a blur of black energy aimed directly at Marguerite's heart. The Kuja were frozen in shock for a fatal second. This was their sister, a respected veteran. But her attack held an unholy killing intent that shattered their hesitation. Arrows flew, swords swung. But Kiyomi was a whirlwind of destruction. The arrows that hit her crumbled to dust on contact. The warriors who got too close were thrown back, their bodies suddenly weak and cold. Their stamina draining away as if leached by an unseen parasite. Marguerite knocked an arrow, her hands shaking. This was Kiyomi, her mentor, the one who had first taught her how to hold a spear. "Kiyomi, stop this," she cried, her voice breaking. The corrupted warrior just snarled, batting aside another attacker and closing the distance. She was almost upon Marguerite, her spear raised for the final, killing blow. And then he was there. A flash of gold and orange. Naruto appeared between them, his back to Marguerite, one hand easily catching the hockey-coated spear just inches from his face. The black, life-draining energy washed over him, but it met a wall of warm, golden chakra and dissipated with a hiss. "So," Naruto said, his voice dangerously calm as he stared into Kiyomi's dead, white eyes. "You finally decided to show yourself." He wasn't speaking to Kiyomi. He was speaking to the thing inside her. The null, through Kiyomi's mouth, let out a frustrated scream and tried to pull the spear back. It wouldn't budge. Naruto's grip was like iron. He squeezed, and cracks appeared on the ancient, hockey-infused wood of the spear. "Naruto, be careful," Kurama warned from within. "This is different from the animals. It's merged with her soul. Killing it might kill her." Naruto knew. He could feel it. The chaotic, terrified energy of Kiyomi's real spirit was trapped deep within the cold, empty shell of the null's power. He had to save her. He shoved the spear back, sending the corrupted warrior stumbling. "Everyone, get back," he commanded. "She's not herself. Don't let her touch you." The battle was a terrifying dance of control and restraint. Naruto, refusing to use his more destructive techniques, relied on pure taijutsu and speed. He flowed around Kiyomi's feral, powerful strikes, each one leaving a scar of gray decay on the stone pavers of the training ground. He was a blur of motion, redirecting her lunges, parrying her blows, always trying to find an opening, to subdue her without causing permanent harm. The other Kuja, including a now-arrived Hancock and her sisters, could only watch in horrified awe. They saw the impossible power of their corrupted sister, and the even greater power of the man who fought to save her. Naruto realized he couldn't win this way. He couldn't tire her out. The null's energy was seemingly endless. He couldn't knock her out. Her body was just a puppet. He had to go to the source. He created a dozen shadow clones, which immediately engaged Kiyomi, overwhelming her with sheer numbers. They weren't trying to hurt her. They were a diversion, a complex, multi-pronged feint. As the real Kiyomi was occupied, the real Naruto flashed behind her. "Forgive me for this," he whispered. He jabbed 2 fingers into the pressure points on her neck. Her body seized, locked in a temporary paralysis, and she fell forward, caught by one of his clones. He laid her gently on the ground. The other Kuja started to move forward, but Hancock's voice, sharp as glass, cut through the air. "Stay back, all of you." Naruto knelt beside Kiyomi, the black aura still pulsing weakly around her. "Kurama, you better have my back on this," he muttered. He placed his palm on her forehead, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. 6 paths. Psychic dive. His world dissolved. He plunged his consciousness out of his own body and into the maelstrom of Kiyomi's mind. It was a nightmare. The landscape of her memories was a twisted forest of black thorns. Her pride, her jealousy, her resentment, all made manifest. In the distance, he could see the light of her true self, a small, flickering flame trapped in a cage of shadows. And wrapped around that cage, feeding on it, was the null. A pulsating sphere of pure, silent void. He approached it, his own mental form a figure of golden light. The null pulsed, a thought of pure, undiluted hatred. It recognized him from the dimensional tear, the source of light and life that was anathema to its own empty nature. It showed him a flash of an image, a glimpse into its origin, a vast, silent throne in an endless blackness. A king cloaked in nothingness. The image was so overwhelming, so ancient and vast, that it threatened to extinguish his own consciousness. But Naruto's will was a weapon. Forged in loneliness, tempered by loss, and sharpened by the love of his friends, it was an unbreakable thing. "Get out of her," he projected, his thought a blade of golden light. He didn't wait for a reply. He surged forward, his spiritual form clashing with the entity of void. It was a battle of pure will. The null lashed out with feelings of despair, loneliness, and cosmic terror. It showed him visions of his own world, lost forever. It tried to drown him in his own grief. But for every wave of darkness it threw at him, Naruto answered with a memory of light. Iruka's kindness, Jiraiya's goofy grin, Sakura's punch, Sasuke's rivalry, the faces of everyone in Konoha who had finally accepted him. He reached the caged flame of Kiyomi's spirit and tore the shadowy bars apart. Then, he turned to the null itself. Sage Art. Sun Soul Rasengan. He formed a Rasengan not of chakra, but of pure, positive spiritual energy. A concentrated sun of hope and life. He thrust it into the heart of the void sphere. There was no sound, but the psychic scream of the null was deafening. The entity was ripped away from Kiyomi's soul, the black tendrils snapping. It was not destroyed, but it was violently ejected. Naruto's consciousness shot back into his own body. He gasped, falling back, the mental and spiritual exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. He was panting, sweat pouring down his face. Before him, the black aura around Kiyomi vanished. Her skin regained its color. She was still unconscious, but she was breathing peacefully. She was herself again. He had saved her, but as he looked up at the shocked faces of every warrior on Amazon Lily, and at the pale, wide-eyed face of their empress, he knew this was just the beginning. He hadn't just defeated a monster. He had shown them the face of the true enemy, a silent, creeping void that he had unwittingly brought to their peaceful shores. The stakes of his presence here had just become terrifyingly, irrevocably clear. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Queen's Confession. The silence that followed Kiyomi's collapse was heavier than the humid night air. It was a silence born of shock, thick with the ozone tang of otherworldly power and the cold dread of a newly understood threat. The Kuja warriors stood frozen, their gazes shifting between the peacefully breathing form of their sister, now just a woman again, and the golden-haired man panting on the ground, the toll of his spiritual battle etched onto his weary face. He had saved one of their own from a fate worse than death, a violation of the soul they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Marguerite was the first to move. She rushed to Naruto's side, her bow forgotten. Kneeling beside him with a look of profound concern. "Naruto, are you all right?" He gave her a weak, lopsided grin. "Just a little drained. Fought a mental battle with a seriously grumpy ghost. Not exactly a walk in the park." His attempt at levity did little to dispel the tension. Elder Nyan hobbled forward, her ancient eyes scrutinizing Kiyomi's still form. She placed a hand on the warrior's chest, then her forehead. And a sigh of relief escaped her lips. Her life force is stable. Weak, but her own. Whatever that thing was, it's gone. She then turned her sharp gaze to Naruto. "What did you do, boy?" Before he could answer, a commanding presence swept down from the upper tiers. Boa Hancock descended the stone steps, her movements fluid and regal, her sisters following a step behind like loyal sentinels. The crowd of warriors parted before her as if by instinct, bowing their heads. She did not look at them. Her entire focus, an intense, burning laser of indecipherable emotion, was fixed on Naruto. She stopped before him, looking down at where he sat on the cold stone, supported by Marguerite. Her face was an unreadable mask of marble, but her knuckles were white where she clenched her fists at her sides. The crowd held its breath. They expected a judgment, an edict. He had brought this plague upon their shores, and a battle had been fought in the heart of their city. The law demanded a response. "You were injured," Hancock stated, her voice devoid of its usual arrogant lilt. It was flat, a simple observation. Naruto shrugged, wincing as a wave of exhaustion rolled through him. "Comes with the territory." Hancock turned to her personal guards, the elite of the Kuja warriors. "Take him to the palace. To the Sunstone recovery chambers. See that he is attended to." Then she turned to another group. "Take Kiyomi to the healer's ward. She is not to be disturbed. Double the patrols on the island's perimeter. Report any further signs of that blight immediately." The orders were delivered with her usual authority, but their content sent a seismic shockwave through the assembled Kuja. The Sunstone chambers were reserved for the Empress herself or her sisters, a place of healing and honor. He was not being imprisoned or punished. He was being cared for. It was an unprecedented act, a public declaration that shifted his status from tolerated anomaly to something else entirely. Something protected by the throne. The guards helped a protesting Naruto to his feet. He could walk, but his legs felt like lead. As they led him away, his gaze met Hancock's. He saw the turmoil in her dark eyes. The storm of fear, confusion, and a fragile, unfamiliar emotion he couldn't yet name. She held his gaze for a long moment before turning away, her silken cape swirling around her as she swept back towards her palace, a queen retreating to her fortress of solitude. The sunstone chambers were unlike any part of the city Naruto had seen. Carved from a vein of pale, golden rock that ran through the heart of the mountain, the room was constantly warm, suffused with a gentle, ambient light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The air was clean and filled with the scent of restorative herbs. He was given a simple tunic and left to rest on a soft, fur-lined cot. He slept for 20 hours straight, a deep, dreamless sleep as his mind and body recovered from the psychic backlash. When he finally awoke, he felt a familiar, grumpy presence rumbling in his mindscape. "You were reckless," Kurama growled, though the usual heat was absent from his tone, replaced by a grim concern. "Diving into a consciousness infected by that thing. You felt it, didn't you?" The presence behind it. Naruto sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the cot. The golden light of the room felt good on his skin. "Yeah, I felt it. Big, old, and likes to sit on a throne in the middle of nowhere." Not exactly friendly. He had seen it for only a fraction of a second, but the age of the Silent King was now burned into his memory. A being of such profound emptiness and ancient malice that it made Kagaya feel like a petulant child. "It's a predator, Naruto," Kurama continued. "And it hunts life itself. That null is a scout, a parasite. It finds a host with a strong emotional fissure, jealousy, anger, fear, and exploits it, using them as a beachhead. Kiyomi's resentment made her a perfect target. So it's my fault," Naruto murmured aloud, his hands clenching. "I brought it here." "Don't be an idiot," the fox snorted. "You didn't ask to be ripped from our world. But this is our reality now. That thing is targeting this island because of you. Your life force is like a lighthouse in the dark for it. It will keep coming. It will find stronger hosts. It will adapt." The weight of that responsibility settled heavily on him. This wasn't just about finding a way home anymore. He had a duty to protect these people from the monster that had followed him through the door between worlds. His reflections were interrupted by a soft knock. The stone door slid open, and Sandersonia and Marigold entered. They were not in their usual battle attire but simpler robes, and they carried a tray of food, steamed fish, fresh fruit, and a pitcher of clean water. Their demeanor was completely changed. The sneering contempt was gone, replaced by a stiff, awkward respect. "The Empress commanded that we see to your needs," Marigold said, her voice a low rumble as she placed the tray on a small table. "She thought we had recovered enough to serve you," Sandersonia added, pointedly not looking at him. It was a clumsy attempt at an apology for their fight in the arena. Naruto smiled faintly. "Thanks. I appreciate it." He took a piece of fruit, his appetite returning with a vengeance. "How's Kiyomi?" "She has awoken," Sandersonia answered, her expression softening. "She remembers. She is ashamed. But she is alive. Our healers say she will make a full recovery. Because of you." She finally met his eyes. And he saw a raw, sincere gratitude there. "You saved her. After what we tried to do to you, you still saved her." "She was a comrade in trouble," Naruto said simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You don't leave comrades behind. That simple shinobi ethos, a concept so core to his being, was a revelation to them. They were warriors, but their loyalty was primarily to their empress and their nation. The idea of risking everything for a single soldier, especially one who had been openly hostile, was a new and powerful concept. They stood in silence for a few moments. The unspoken truths of the arena, his protection of their secret, his refusal to harm them, and now this, settling between them. They had been his executioners. Now, they were his wardens. And they were beginning to feel like his allies. Later that evening, after the Gorgon sisters had departed, another guard came for him. "The Empress will see you." Naruto followed the guard through the winding, opulent corridors of the palace. They did not go to the grand throne room where he had first been judged. Instead, they climbed a long, spiraling staircase that led to the highest point of the palace. to a set of large, ornate doors. The guard bowed and retreated, leaving him alone. This was it. He pushed the doors open and stepped inside. It was Hancock's private chambers. The room was vast and luxurious, filled with plush velvet cushions, silken drapes, and treasures from 100 plundered ships. A wide balcony offered a breathtaking view of the entire island, bathed in the silver light of the moon. Boa Hancock stood on that balcony, her back to him, her long black hair stirring in the gentle night breeze. She was not wearing her empress regalia, but a simple, elegant silk gown that did little to hide the tense line of her shoulders. Salome, her giant snake, was nowhere to be seen. She was alone. "You wanted to see me?" Naruto asked, his voice breaking the silence. She turned, her face a carefully constructed mask of cold indifference, but he could see the tremor in her hands. "I require an explanation," she said, her voice tight. "That thing. That darkness that took Kiyomi. What is it, and what does it have to do with you?" Naruto walked forward until he stood a few feet away from her on the balcony, the whole of her kingdom spread out beneath them. He told her everything Kurama had explained. He spoke of the null, the void entity, the parasite that fed on negative emotions. He told her it was drawn to his own energy, a beacon from another world. He explained that it was a threat not just to him, but to her entire island. He didn't soften the truth or downplay the danger. She was a leader. She deserved the facts. As he spoke, he watched her. He saw the facade of the imperious empress begin to crack under the strain of his words. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, not the fear of an enemy she could fight, but the existential terror of a threat that came from within. That could turn her own people against her. "This is your fault," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of accusation and despair. "You brought this curse to my home." "Yes," Naruto said, without hesitation. "I did, and it's my responsibility to end it." His simple acceptance of the blame, his lack of excuses, seemed to throw her off balance. She stared at him, her carefully constructed defenses crumbling. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why would you do that? Why would you protect us? You protected my sister's shame. You saved a warrior who despised you. Why?" Naruto looked into her eyes, and his sage's senses felt the true source of her question. It wasn't about Kiyomi. It was about the mark on her back. He saw the deep, ancient terror coiled around her heart. The same terror he had felt in Kiyomi's mind. "Because I know what it's like," he said softly. "To have something ugly forced on you. To have a part of you that makes you feel like a monster. That you want to hide from the entire world." That was the key. His words slid past her arrogance and plunged directly into the wounded core of her being. Her breath hitched, and a single, traitorous tear traced a path down her perfect cheek. "You know nothing," she choked out, her voice breaking. "Don't I?" He pressed gently. "That brand on your sister's back. The one you have, too. The hoof of the soaring dragon. You were slaves, weren't you? Slaves to the celestial dragons." It was a guess, pieced together from what Elder Nyan had told him of the cruel world nobles and the terror he'd sensed in her. But he knew, with absolute certainty, that it was the truth. The name, Celestial Dragons, was like a physical blow. Hancock staggered back, her face ashen, her eyes wide with a horrific, relived trauma. The Empress of Amazon Lily, the pirate warlord, the most beautiful woman in the world, vanished. In her place was a terrified, broken girl. The dam of her composure, which had held for over a decade, shattered into a million pieces. Sobs racked her body, great, shuddering gasps of pain and grief she had suppressed for years. She sank to her knees, her hands covering her face. And then, the story poured out of her. A torrent of poison and pain. She told him of the day she and her sisters were stolen from their home, sold into slavery. She spoke of the unimaginable horror of the holy land of Mariajoy, of the cruelty of the world nobles who treated humans as pets. Of the forced consumption of her devil fruit for their amusement. Of the brand, the searing hot iron that had marked her not just as property, but as something less than human. She spoke with the raw agony of a soul that had never been allowed to heal. Finally, she turned, pulling down the back of her gown to reveal the ugly, scarred flesh, the symbol of her eternal shame. Naruto knelt in front of her. He listened to every horrific word, and he did not flinch. He did not offer pity. Pity was an insult to a survivor. Instead, when her story was finished, when she was left trembling and empty on the cold stone of her balcony, he looked directly into her tear-filled eyes. His own face was a mask of grim, resolute understanding. He had felt this pain before. He had been the vessel of the Nine Tails, the demon fox, the monster that everyone in his village feared and hated. He knew the loneliness. He knew the shame. "Stand up, Hancock," he said, his voice low but firm, imbued with an unshakable certainty. She looked at him, confused, and slowly, shakily, she rose to her feet. He stood as well, meeting her gaze. He didn't touch her. He didn't offer a hug or a comforting hand. He offered something far more powerful. "A vow. My whole life," he began, his voice ringing with the conviction of a man who had stared down gods. "People looked at me like I was a monster. Something to be feared and hated. I know what that cage feels like. I know what it is to be branded." He took a deep breath. And his presence seemed to fill the balcony, a pillar of golden, unwavering strength. "So I swear this to you, Boa Hancock. On my life, as long as I am breathing, no one will ever put a chain on you or your sisters again. Not the world government, not the celestial dragons, not some god from an empty void. I will not let them touch you. This island is your home. And from now on, I'm its wall." It wasn't a declaration of love. It was a declaration of war against her past, against her fears, against any who would ever seek to harm her. It was the promise of absolute sanctuary, backed by the strength she had seen with her own eyes. It was the one thing in the world she had never had. Security. Hancock stared at him, her sobs subsiding, replaced by a profound, soul-shaking stillness. His words had done more than comfort her. They had reforged the broken pieces of her world into something new. He didn't see her as a monster or an empress or a beautiful object. He saw her pain, and he had thrown himself in front of it. Becoming her shield, the hatred for men that had defined her entire existence, a shield of her own making, dissolved in that moment. It was washed away by the sheer, unadulterated sincerity of his promise. She looked at Naruto Uzumaki, the stranger from another world, and for the first time, she saw not a man, but a savior. And in the ruins of her broken heart, something new and fragile and terrifyingly warm began to bloom. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The World Beyond the Calm Belt. The air on Amazon Lily had changed. The ever-present undercurrent of fear and suspicion that had defined Naruto's initial weeks had evaporated, replaced by something warmer, stronger. A sense of security. It was a novel feeling for a nation of warriors who had spent generations looking over their shoulders. Their peace a fragile thing bought with a tenuous warlord title and the natural defense of the Calm Belt. Now, they had a wall. A living, breathing wall with sun-gold hair and an irrepressible grin. Naruto had become a fixture in the city's daily life. Mornings were spent in meditation, centering himself and stretching his senses across the island, ever watchful for the creeping gray of the null's touch. Afternoons were for training. The sessions were no longer a curious spectacle but an institution. Warriors of all ages now participated, their initial skepticism melted away by the undeniable progress they were making. They were learning to channel their haki with the fine-tuned precision of his chakra control, their endurance multiplied, their attacks gaining a new level of versatility. His relationship with the island's rulers had also found a new, comfortable equilibrium. He often shared the evening meal with Hancock and her sisters in their private dining hall. The conversations were easy, filled with stories of his world and questions about theirs. Marigold and Sandersonia, once his would-be executioners, now treated him with the gruff affection of siblings. Arguing with him over the proper way to roast a sea king or challenging him to ludicrous feats of strength, which he would always win with a laugh. And Hancock was transforming. The icy, arrogant shell of the Empress was still her public face, a necessary armor for a queen. But in his presence, in the quiet moments away from the prying eyes of her subjects, it melted away. She would watch him train her warriors. A soft, almost imperceptible smile gracing her lips. On the balcony where she had confessed her deepest trauma, they would often stand together in the evenings, not always speaking. Simply sharing the silence as they looked out over their island. He had become her confidant, the anchor for her turbulent soul. The fragile bloom of affection she felt for him was growing. its roots strengthening in the bedrock of the absolute trust she had placed in him. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was falling in love. This fragile peace was shattered on a bright, clear afternoon. A Kuja scout ship, one of the few capable of navigating the treacherous edge of the calm belt, came racing back to port, its sails pushed to their limit by a team of massive Yuta sea serpents. The scout captain, a veteran warrior named Ran, bypassed all protocol and ran, breathless and panicked, directly to the palace. She found the leadership assembled in the main courtyard, observing the advanced training. Empress, Ran gasped, falling to one knee. Marines, a fleet, at least 10 warships, including a vice admiral's battleship. They are outfitted with strange equipment, scanners, and they are not passing by. They are on a direct course for Amazon Lily. A cold silence fell over the courtyard. The laughter and shouts of training died instantly. 10 warships was not a patrol. It was an investigative force. Or an invasion. Hancock's transformation was instantaneous. The soft, relaxed woman vanished, and the Snake Empress returned in all her frigid, intimidating glory. Her eyes narrowed to dangerous slits, and her voice was like the crack of a whip. "They dare," she hissed, her haki flaring, a wave of palpable royal fury that made the air itself seem to grow heavy. "They would violate our treaty and sail into my waters. I will sink their fleet to the bottom of the sea and send their drowned corpses back to their masters as a warning." She turned to her commanders. "Ready the ships. Muster the Kuja pirates. We meet them at sea and show them the price of their insolence." The warriors roared their approval, their hands flying to their weapons. Their bloodlust ignited by their queen's rage. This was the enemy they had been taught to hate their entire lives, the faceless agents of the world government that had allowed the celestial dragons to scar their empress. "Wait," a calm voice cut through the rising tide of war fever. All eyes turned to Naruto. He stood with his arms crossed, his expression serious. "A battle is what they expect. And a battle is what we shouldn't give them." "He is right," Elder Nyan added, stepping forward, her face grim. "Empress, your rage is justified. But think, if you engage a marine fleet and destroy it, the world government will have the pretext they need to revoke your warlord status. They would send an admiral. A buster call. Our island, our home, would be wiped from the map. Then we are to do nothing." Hancock retorted, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. "We are to allow their warships to anchor in our harbor. To let their filthy feet walk on our sacred ground." "No," Naruto said, stepping towards her. He addressed her, but his voice was loud and clear enough for everyone to hear. "We won't let them get that far. You're right to be angry, Hancock. But a war means casualties. It means risking the lives of your people, your sisters. It means creating exactly the kind of large-scale negative emotion that the null entity feeds on. What if it possesses one of them in the middle of a battle at sea? We can't take that risk." He paused, letting his words sink in. "There's a third option. Not war, not submission. A message." "What kind of message?" Sandersonia asked, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Naruto's gaze was hard as diamond. "An unforgettable one. Let me go out there. Alone." A wave of protests erupted from the Kuja. Marguerite rushed forward. "Naruto, no. 10 warships, a vice admiral. You can't face them all by yourself." Hancock's face went pale with alarm. Her protective instincts, now fully entwined with her feelings for him, screamed in protest. "Absolutely not. I will not hide behind you while you face my enemies. I am the empress of this island. It is my duty to fight. And it's my duty to protect it," he countered, his voice softening as he looked directly at her. He stepped closer, into her personal space, forcing the rest of the world to fade away for a moment. "You have an entire nation to lead. I'm just one man. Let me be the wall I promised I'd be. Trust me, Hancock." His words, a direct call back to his vow on the balcony, struck her with the force of a physical blow. He wasn't asking as a warrior. He was asking as her protector. He was asking her to have faith in his promise. To fight her every instinct to shield him, and instead allow him to shield her. It was the hardest thing she had ever been asked to do. The desire to fight alongside him, to protect him as fiercely as he protected her, was a raging inferno in her chest. But she looked into his calm, confident blue eyes, and she saw not arrogance. but an absolute certainty that was as deep and vast as the ocean itself. She saw the man who had faced down her ultimate power without flinching, who had plunged into the abyss to save her subject. Slowly, agonizingly, she gave a single, sharp nod. "Very well," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Show them. Show the world the consequences of threatening my home." The marine fleet cut through the calm waters. A procession of gray steel and white sails. On the bridge of the flagship, the dauntless, Vice Admiral Onagumo stared out at the shimmering heat haze that marked the beginning of the calm belt. He was a tall, stern man with a spider tattoo on his forehead and 6 sword hilts visible over his shoulders. He was a veteran of the Grand Line, a pragmatist who believed in overwhelming force and strict discipline. "Energy readings are off the charts, sir," a communications officer reported, his voice tense. "It's like nothing I've ever seen. A massive, stable source of something originating from the island." "That's what we're here to investigate," Onagumo grunted. "The reports of Warlord Hancock's island obliterating a sea king the size of a mountain with a single blast of energy were exaggerated, I'm sure. But where there's smoke, there's fire. Prepare the cannons. We will approach with caution, but we will have our answers." As they crossed the invisible threshold into the calm belt, the natural sea breeze died, and the air became unnaturally still. The familiar sounds of the ocean vanished, replaced by an eerie silence. It was then that they saw him. A lookout screamed, pointing a trembling finger. "Man in the water. No, on the water. He's walking on the water." Onagumo raised his spyglass. His eyes widened. A single figure, a young man with bright golden hair and an orange jacket, was striding towards them across the surface of the sea as if it were solid ground. He was alone. "What in the blazes?" Onagumo muttered. "Is this some kind of Kuja trick? A devil fruit user?" He raised his voice. "All ships, halt. This is Vice Admiral Onagumo of the World Government. Identify yourself." The figure didn't stop. He kept walking, his pace unhurried, a picture of impossible calm in the face of an entire naval fleet. "He's ignoring the warning, sir." Onagumo's patience, never a plentiful resource, snapped. "Insolence. Fire a warning shot." A cannon on the flagship boomed, launching a cannonball that soared through the air, aimed to splash harmlessly in front of the approaching man. But it never reached the water. The man casually raised a hand and swatted the cannonball out of the air, sending it careening off into the distance like a pebble. A stunned silence fell over the deck of the Dauntless. "So, no more warnings," Onagumo growled, his face darkening with rage. "This is a hostile act against the world government. All ships, target the anomaly. Open fire. Annihilate him." The world erupted in smoke and thunder. 100 cannons fired at once. A storm of iron and gunpowder hurtling towards a single man. It was an overwhelming, apocalyptic barrage that should have turned a 10-mile stretch of ocean into a boiling cauldron. Naruto stopped walking. He looked at the screaming wall of death approaching him and simply brought his hands together in a familiar seal. Multi-shadow clone jutsu. In a series of explosive puffs of smoke, the sea was suddenly covered with figures. 1,000 identical Narutos stood on the water, each with a defiant grin on his face. They met the cannon barrage head-on. Some clones were obliterated, but hundreds more leapt into the air, kicking the cannonballs back at the ships or deflecting them into each other. The Marines on the decks could only stare in horror. An army had appeared from a single man. "What is this devilry?" Onagumo roared. Before he could give another order, the army charged. The 1,000 Narutos ran across the water at impossible speeds, a golden tide of humanity that swarmed the fleet. They ran up the sheer wooden hulls of the ships, a 1,000-front invasion. Chaos erupted. The highly disciplined Marine soldiers found themselves utterly overwhelmed. The clones weren't killing. They were disabling. One Naruto would appear in the crow's nest and tie the lookout in his own rigging. Another would dismantle a cannon in seconds, leaving the crew with a pile of useless metal. A squad would swarm the rudder controls, jamming them. They moved with a speed and coordination that was utterly inhuman, a whirlwind of orange and gold that sowed pandemonium and rendered the entire fleet combat ineffective in less than a minute. On the flagship, Onagumo and his elite guards found themselves fighting for their lives against dozens of the clones, their swords and rokushiki techniques proving useless against an enemy who simply reappeared in a puff of smoke when defeated. Meanwhile, the real Naruto, standing alone in the center of the now pacified fleet, raised his right hand. A shrieking, spinning vortex of wind chakra formed in his palm, growing larger and larger until it was the size of a boulder, its sound like 1,000 blades grinding together. Wind style. Rasenshuriken. He didn't throw it at the ships. He hurled it down into the sea, directly in front of Onagumo's flagship. For a moment, there was only the piercing shriek of the jutsu. Then, the ocean detonated. An enormous dome of white energy erupted from the water, followed by a titanic explosion that launched a pillar of water and wind miles into the sky. A colossal waterspout, a maelstrom of unimaginable power, formed, creating a localized hurricane. The warships were caught in its grip, tossed about like children's toys in a bathtub. Masts snapped, sails were shredded, and men were thrown across decks. The sea itself had become their enemy, a raging beast that hammered and tore at them. From the cliffs of Amazon Lily, Hancock and her people watched in stunned, silent awe. They saw the distant fleet, which had looked so menacing, now engulfed in a storm of impossible scale, a storm created by the will of a single man. Hancock clutched the stone balustrade, her knuckles white, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. A wild symphony of terror for his safety and overwhelming pride in his strength. The storm died as quickly as it had been born. It simply dissipated. The raging sea calmed, leaving the marine fleet a crippled, floating wreck. The ships were battered but intact, the crews alive but terrified and utterly defeated. On the deck of the Dauntless, Vice Admiral Onagumo struggled to his feet. His uniform torn, his pride in tatters. He looked out at the devastation of his fleet, his mind unable to process the scale of his defeat. A flicker of movement. Naruto stood before him, not a speck of water on him. His expression calm but radiating an aura of power that was more intimidating than any rage. The last of the shadow clones around the fleet vanished in puffs of smoke. "This is my only warning," Naruto said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the storm he had just unleashed. "Amazon Lily and its people are under my protection. Report to your superiors. Tell them what you saw here today. You will not return." Without waiting for a reply, he vanished in a blur of motion, too fast for the eye to follow. He was simply gone. Back on the cliffside, a golden flicker appeared. Naruto stood beside Hancock, a reassuring smile on his face. "It's done. They won't be back." Hancock didn't speak. She threw her arms around him, her body trembling with overwhelming relief. It was a gesture so uncharacteristic, so vulnerable, that it stunned everyone around them. He was safe. Her wall had held. Far away at sea, on the ruined deck of his flagship, Vice Ad. Miral Onagumo stared at the empty space where the Golden Demon had stood. His career, his pride, his entire understanding of power, had been shattered in the span of 5 minutes. He was consumed by a black, festering humiliation. A wound far deeper than any physical injury. Drifting unseen on the saltwater breeze, a wisp of pure, cold nothingness, the purged remnants of the null, sensed this potent, delicious wound. It had been searching for a new host, one with a strong will and a deep well of negative emotion to exploit. It had found the perfect candidate. The shadow drifted towards the broken Vice Admiral, a promise of power to reclaim his lost honor, and coiled around his corrupted heart. The news of the incident, despite the world government's best efforts to bury it, exploded across the globe. Morgans, the flamboyant president of the World News Economic Journal, had a field day. The story was too big, too sensational to suppress. Eyewitness accounts from terrified Marines spoke of a one-man army, a golden demon who walked on water and commanded hurricanes. The world, already in turmoil, was shaken by the emergence of a new, unquantifiable power player. The paper that landed on desks from Mariajoy to the far corners of the New World featured a hastily sketched, blurry image of Naruto. Above it, in bold, blazing letters that would change the balance of power forever, was the headline. The Whirlpool Demon of the Calm Belt. Does the world have a fifth emperor? Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. Hunters in the Shadows. The news of the fifth emperor hit the world with the force of a tidal wave. In taverns and throne rooms, on pirate ships and marine bases, the name, Whirlpool Demon, was whispered with a mixture of awe and terror. For the Kuja of Amazon Lily, it was a source of immense, unprecedented pride. Their island, once a secret sanctuary, was now the fortress of a global power. Their protector was a man whose name shook the very foundations of the world government. The fear of the outside world, a fear that had been their constant companion for generations, was finally beginning to recede. For Naruto, the title was an unwanted complication. He had no desire to be an emperor, no ambition to rule or conquer. He had simply drawn a line in the sand, or rather, the water, to protect his new home. But he understood the implications. He had painted a massive target on his back. He was no longer an anomaly. He was a declared threat to the established order. The world government would not, could not, let such a challenge go unanswered. A fleet had failed. Next, they would send scalpels. Hancock, too, understood the gravity of their new status. The title of emperor offered a protection far greater than that of a warlord, but it also invited a much higher caliber of enemy. She found herself spending more and more time with Naruto, not just as the woman falling for him, but as a fellow leader. They would convene in the palace war room, maps of the island spread across a large stone table, discussing defensive strategies, patrol routes, and contingency plans. They won't send another fleet, Naruto said one evening, tracing a line along the island's treacherous coastline. That would be admitting the first one wasn't a fluke. They'll be subtle this time. They'll send assassins. My Kuja are the finest warriors in the world, Hancock stated, a familiar spark of pride in her voice. No assassin can set foot on this island without our knowledge. The ones they'll send won't be ordinary assassins, Naruto countered gently. They'll be ghosts, masters of stealth and silent killing. We need to be ready for an enemy we can't see. His prediction came to pass under the light of a crescent moon, 3 weeks later. There was no warning, no alarm. They simply appeared. A young Kuja warrior named Lilia was on watch in a treetop perch high above the western jungle. The night was calm, the air still. One moment, she was scanning the silent canopy. The next, a voice whispered directly behind her, "A lovely evening." Before she could even scream, a hand, clad in a pristine white glove, chopped the back of her neck with surgical precision. She slumped forward, unconscious before she even registered the attack. A tall figure in a white suit and a horned, expressionless mask lowered her gently to the platform. He tapped a finger to his ear. Point Alpha is secure. No sign of the primary target. Proceeding to Point Beta, similar scenes played out in near-perfect silence across the island's perimeter. 6 figures, all clad in the immaculate white suits of Cypher Pole Aegis Zero, moved through the jungle like wraiths. They were the world government's ultimate weapon, a unit of superhuman spies and assassins who had mastered the 6 deadly arts of Rokushiki. They did not trigger a single trap. They did not alert a single patrol. They neutralized the outer sentries with a silent, terrifying efficiency, their movements so fast they were little more than blurs in the moonlight. They were the scalpels, sent to dissect the island's defenses and, if possible, excise its golden-haired heart. The leader of the unit, a man who went only by the code name Kaku, in honor of a legendary predecessor, stood on a high cliff overlooking the sleeping city. He was tall and lean, his face hidden behind a stoic, long-nosed Tengu mask. He surveyed the city, his senses honed by a lifetime of training, taking in every detail. The target's energy signature is centered in the palace, as expected, he reported into his mouthpiece. The concentration of power is astronomical. The reports did not do it justice. His voice was calm, analytical, betraying no hint of fear. All units, converge. Phase 1 is complete. Phase 2. Infiltration and direct observation. Do not engage unless compromised. This is a reconnaissance mission. We are here to measure the monster, not to fight it. But they had underestimated their target's own sensory abilities. In his chambers in the palace, Naruto's eyes snapped open. He had been in a light meditative trance, his sage mode senses spread like a gossamer net over the entire island. He had felt it, not a sound, not a movement, but a series of minute, coordinated disturbances. 6 pinpricks of life force, moving with unnatural speed and discipline, where there should have been none. And he felt the sudden, silent snuffing of the sentries, conscious thoughts as they were knocked out. "They're here," Kurama's voice rumbled in his mind, instantly alert. 6 of them, fast, very disciplined. They feel sterile, like perfectly honed tools. Naruto was out of his bed in a silent flash. He didn't raise a general alarm. That would cause panic and create chaos, which a team like this would surely exploit. This was his fight. He moved to the window, his eyes scanning the darkness. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them, 6 needles of killing intent probing the city's defenses. He created a single shadow clone. Wake Hancock. Quietly. Tell her we have uninvited guests. Tell her to lock down the palace and protect the civilians. No one goes out. No one engages. The clone nodded and melted into the shadows of the corridor. The real Naruto took a deep breath, molding his chakra. He wasn't the blazing son of the 5th emperor now. He was the shinobi, the hunter. He slipped out of the window and became one with the night. The game of cat and mouse began. Kaku's unit was expertly weaving through the city's alleys and across its rooftops, their movements a synchronized ballet of espionage. They were using Geppo moonwalk to kick off the air itself, crossing wide gaps between buildings in a single bound, and Soru shave to move in short, impossibly fast bursts that made them invisible to the naked eye. They were ghosts, but they were hunting a demon who wrote the book on ghost warfare. One of the CP0 agents, a lithe woman in a cat mask, dropped into a shadowed marketplace. Her mission was to get close to the palace's foundations, to assess its structural weaknesses. As she moved, a flicker of orange in her periphery caught her eye. She spun, her fingers already formed into a deadly Shigen finger pistol strike. Nothing. She scanned the area. The marketplace was empty. She dismissed it as a trick of the light and continued on. She didn't see Naruto, pressed flat against the ceiling of an awning directly above her, using chakra to adhere to the surface. He was a spider waiting for the fly. He had learned their patterns. They were professional, but predictable. They moved from shadow to shadow, always taking the path of most concealment. He dropped down behind her as she passed, making less sound than a falling leaf. Her honed instincts screamed a warning an instant before he struck. She spun, her leg lashing out in a Rankyaku tempest kick that sent a blade of compressed air whistling through the darkness. Naruto simply swayed to the side, letting the air blade slice through a stack of fruit crates behind him. Before her foot even touched the ground, he tapped her on the shoulder. She flinched, expecting a devastating blow, but it was just a light touch. She whirled around again. He was gone. A small, paper tag was now stuck to the back of her white suit. It was a flying Raijin seal. He repeated the process with 2 more agents. He was a phantom, a whisper in the dark. He didn't engage them in combat. He toyed with them, outmaneuvering their Rokushiki with his own superior speed and stealth. He was gathering intelligence, testing their reactions, and most importantly, marking his prey. For the CP0 agents, it was a deeply unnerving experience. They were the hunters, the apex predators of the human world. But here, on this island, they felt like they were being hunted. Their target wasn't in the palace. He was all around them. Kaku felt his team's rising anxiety through their terse communications. This was wrong. The target was supposed to be a powerhouse, a living artillery piece. He wasn't supposed to be a master of stealth who could outmaneuver CP0. All units, tactical retreat to the rendezvous point, Kaku ordered, his voice still calm, but now laced with a new urgency. Our cover is blown. The target is actively hunting us. 3 of his agents began to fall back, but it was too late. Naruto decided the game was over. From his perch on the palace roof, he flashed through a series of hand signs. 3 yellow flashes of light erupted simultaneously in different parts of the city. He teleported to the flying Raijin seals he had placed, appearing beside each of the 3 retreating agents at the exact same instant. Before they could even react to his sudden appearance, he struck. A gentle chop to the back of the neck for the woman in the cat mask. A Rasengan, held back to its most basic, concussive form, pressed into the stomach of a burly agent in a bull mask, knocking the wind out of him. A simple, chakra-enhanced sweep, kick that took the legs out from under a 3rd agent in a bird mask. The 3 elite assassins were neutralized in less than a second, collapsing in unconscious heaps. The 3 remaining agents, including Kaku, felt their comrades' signatures vanish from their senses. Kaku froze. 3 hostiles down, he murmured, his analytical mind struggling to process the speed and efficiency of the attack. He took out half the team in a single coordinated strike. It's impossible. Boss, he's here, one of his remaining men shouted. Kaku looked up. Naruto was standing on a rooftop across from them, the moonlight illuminating his calm, serious face. He wasn't even breathing hard. Your hunt is over, Naruto said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. Surrender, and I'll let you leave this island with your lives. This was the moment of truth. Kaku looked at his two remaining subordinates. Retreat was the logical option. But the pride of Cypher Pole Aegis Zero was a powerful thing. And he had a mission. He needed to measure this man's power. Engage, he said simply. The three of them shot forward, their bodies blurring as they used Soru. They appeared around Naruto from three different directions. Their attacks perfectly synchronized. One aimed a Shigen at his throat. The other launched a swirling Rankyaku. Kaku himself came from above, his body spinning like a drill, his legs coated in the metallic sheen of Tekai iron body aiming to crush Naruto into the rooftop. Naruto didn't move. He closed his eyes. At the last possible instant, he dropped into a low crouch. The three attacks passed harmlessly through the space where he had been, nearly hitting each other. He exploded upwards in their midst, his body a whirlwind of motion. An elbow to one agent's ribs that cracked his Tekai like porcelain. A palm strike to the chin of the other that sent him flying. He was left facing Kaku. The leader of CP0 was different. Faster, stronger, more precise. He landed gracefully, and immediately launched into a new assault, a fluid, deadly combination of all the Rokushiki arts. He was a storm of pinpoint strikes and razor-sharp kicks, his movements seamless. But he was fighting a master. Naruto met his storm with the controlled grace of a taijutsu expert. He parried, blocked, and redirected, his movements economical and devastatingly effective. It was the frog kata, a HTING style that used the natural energy around him to extend the reach and power of his blows. Every time Kaku struck, he felt like he was hitting a tangible, invisible wall of force that sent a jarring shock up his limbs. You're good, Naruto admitted, deflecting a finger pistol aimed at his eye. But you're too rigid, too predictable. As they fought, a volley of arrows suddenly rained down from the surrounding rooftops. They weren't aimed at Naruto, but at Kaku, perfectly timed to disrupt his movements. Marguerite and a dozen of the Kuja's finest archers had taken up positions, refusing to stand by while their protector fought alone. Their arrows, infused with the haki he had taught them to control so precisely, were more than just projectiles. They were guided missiles that Kaku was forced to dodge, breaking his rhythm. Hancock stood on the main palace balcony, her sisters by her side. She hadn't locked down the palace. She had turned it into a fortress, her warriors lining its walls. They were not hiding. They were his backup. They were his army. This was their home, and they would fight for it alongside him. Her heart swelled with a fierce, possessive pride as she watched him fight. His movements a deadly dance under the moon. He was her champion, and she was his queen. The distraction was all Naruto needed. As Kaku twisted to avoid a particularly well-aimed arrow from Marguerite, Naruto surged forward. He didn't use a Rasengan or a clone. He used a simple, devastatingly effective punch, his fist glowing with a faint golden chakra. The punch landed squarely in Kaku's sternum. The leader of CP0 felt the impact not as a blunt force, but as an explosion from the inside out. The chakra disrupted his internal systems, shattering his focus and his formidable Tekai. He gasped, the air driven from his lungs, and collapsed to his knees, his mask cracking down the middle. Naruto stood over him, his fist still smoking slightly. The two remaining conscious agents were surrounded by Kuja warriors, spears leveled at their throats. The fight was over. He reached down and pulled the broken mask from Kaku's face, revealing a man with sharp, intelligent eyes and a grim, resigned expression. "Tell me who sent you," Naruto said, his voice low. "And why?" Kaku coughed, a trickle of blood at the corner of his mouth. He looked past Naruto at the army of warrior women standing ready, at the Empress watching from her balcony, and then back to the man who had single-handedly dismantled his elite unit. "The world government fears the unknown," Kaku said, his voice raspy. "You are the greatest unknown this world has seen in a century. My mission was to gauge your threat level." He let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Consider it gauged. The first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The brief, silent war for Amazon Lily was over. Naruto had won, but he knew, as he looked at the defeated face of the government's top assassin, that this was just one battle. He had proven his strength. Now, the 5 elders and the mysterious, shadowy ruler of the world, Amu, would know exactly what kind of monster they were dealing with. They would send more than scalpels next time. They would send a plague. Miles away, in a dark, repurposed marine brig, Vice Admiral Onagumo screamed as his body twisted and contorted. Black, vein-like patterns spread across his skin, and his eyes glowed with a cold, dead light. The voice of the Null whispered promises of vengeance and power in his mind, reshaping his broken pride into a weapon of pure, nihilistic hatred. His transformation was almost complete. The hunter had been dealt with. Soon, the abomination would be unleashed. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Unholy Alliance. The WN that followed the silent infiltration was cold and tense. In a windowless, heavily guarded chamber deep within the palace, the 6 members of the defeated CP0 unit sat in stoic silence. Their masks had been removed. Their immaculate white suits were scuffed and torn, and their wrists were bound in sea stone cuffs, a precaution Elder Nyan had insisted upon. They were prisoners, but their composure was unbreakable. They sat like statues of defiance, their faces betraying nothing. Kaku, their leader, stared at the stone wall opposite him, his mind a whirlwind of cold, hard calculation. His mission was a catastrophic failure. They had not only failed to capture or eliminate the target, but they had been systematically and effortlessly dismantled. The target, Naruto Uzumaki, was not just a powerhouse. He was a strategic and tactical genius with a level of stealth capability that rivaled, or even surpassed, their own. The threat assessment had shifted from extremely high to unquantifiable. Hancock, Naruto, and Elder Nyan entered the chamber, the heavy stone door grinding shut behind them. The air immediately became thick with animosity. Hancock's gaze was venomous, the fury of a queen whose sanctuary had been violated. "Tell me who you work for," she demanded, her voice dripping with ice. "Who gave the order to invade my island? Speak now, and I may grant you a swift death." Kaku's eyes shifted from the wall to her, his expression unreadable. "I am an agent of the world government. That is all you need to know." "Not good enough," Naruto said, stepping forward. His demeanor was not threatening, but his presence seemed to suck the air out of the room. He was projecting a fraction of his true power, a subtle pressure that made the CP0 agents acutely aware of the chasm between them. "I know you're not Marines. Cypher Pole, Aegis Zero, right, the direct hand of the Gorosei. Or maybe someone even higher." The slightest flicker in Kaku's eyes told Naruto he'd hit the mark. "These were the true enforcers of the world's shadowy elite. You have no authority to question us," one of the other agents, the woman who wore the cat mask, spat. "We are the justice of the world. Your justice feels a lot like sneaking into someone's home in the middle of the night to kill them in their sleep," Naruto countered calmly. He looked at Kaku. "What happens now? You failed. You go back. You report that I'm stronger than you thought. They send someone else. Maybe one of the admirals. Maybe all of them. The cycle continues until my home is a crater or your world government is broken. Is that the future you want?" "My wants are irrelevant," Kaku replied, his voice a flat monotone. "I follow my orders." Hancock's patience snapped. "Then you will die for them." She took a step forward, her haki flaring. "I will execute every last one of you and hang your bodies from the palace walls as a message to your masters." "No," Naruto said, placing a firm but gentle hand on her arm. She stopped, turning to him with a look of furious disbelief. "Hancock, stop. Killing them gets us nothing. It gets me satisfaction," she hissed. "And it makes us murderers," he replied, his voice low and for her alone. "It makes us no different from them. They are more valuable alive. As bargaining chips, as a source of information. We are not butchers." His words were a splash of cold water on her rage. He was appealing to the new person she was becoming, the leader who thought beyond vengeance. She hated it. She hated the logic, hated the restraint, and hated the sight of these men who represented the institution that had enslaved her. But she looked at Naruto's steady, imploring eyes, and the fire in her own slowly subsided. She pulled her arm away but took a step back, her silence a reluctant, fuming acquiescence. The trust she had placed in him was being tested, and it was holding. Before the tense standoff could continue, a tremor ran through the stone floor. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a deep, resonant thrum of corrupt energy, a vibration that felt fundamentally wrong. Naruto's head snapped up, his sage mode senses, already on high alert, screaming a dire warning. He felt it, a presence, rocketing across the calm belt towards them. It was a massive, festering wound of an aura, a vortex of hatred, humiliation, and the chilling, empty cold of the null. Naruto. Arama's voice was a thunderclap in his mind. It's here. The parasite. It found a new host. A strong one. A will filled with pure, unadulterated rage. It's 100 times stronger than when it possessed that Kiyomi woman. The doors to the chamber burst open. Marguerite stood there, her face pale with terror. Naruto. The coast. Something is coming. They raced from the prison chamber to the high, open-air balcony where Hancock had confessed her past. From this vantage point, they could see the turquoise expanse of the calm belt. A dark scar was being carved across its surface. A lone figure was walking on the water. But the sea around him was not placid. It was turning black, the water becoming thick and oily. The vibrant coral beneath the surface was bleaching to a skeletal white. And the fish that swam too close floated to the surface, their bodies gray and withered. The figure was a walking plague. Naruto focused, and his eyes widened in grim recognition. The tattered remains of a vice admiral's coat. 6 sword hilts rising above the shoulders. Onagumo, he breathed. The marine from the fleet, Hancock whispered, her hand instinctively going to Naruto's arm. But it wasn't Onagumo. Not anymore. As he drew closer, they could see the changes. His skin was the color of old parchment, crisscrossed with a network of pulsating black veins. His eyes, visible even from this distance, glowed with a dead white light. He radiated a cold that could be felt even on the high balcony, a malevolent pressure that promised only decay and death. He reached the pristine white sand of the beach and stopped. He raised his head, his dead eyes seeming to stare directly at Naruto in the palace. His voice boomed across the island, a horrific, layered sound that was part Onagumo's furious baritone and part the grating, static whisper of the null. Uzumaki, I have come to reclaim my honor and extinguish your light. 100 Kuja warriors, already assembled on the cliffs above the beach, acted on instinct. At their commander's signal, they unleashed a volley of haki-infused arrows, a black-tipped rain of death that could shatter steel. The arrows never reached their target. They flew into the corrupting aura that surrounded Onagumo and simply ceased to exist. They crumbled mid-flight, turning into fine gray dust that was scattered by a non-existent wind. The corrupt Vice Admiral drew one of his 6 swords. The blade was no longer steel, but a solid shard of black, corrosive energy. With a speed that defied his rank, he vanished, using a twisted, lurching version of Soru. He reappeared amongst a group of warriors on the cliffside. He didn't even swing his sword. He simply moved through them. The women he passed screamed, collapsing to the ground, their skin turning gray. Their life force draining away before their comrades' horrified eyes. They weren't dead, but they were little more than breathing husks. He's absorbing their life force. Naruto yelled, his mind racing. Hancock, get the civilians to the mountain's core. No one engages him in close combat. Elder Nyan, get the healers ready. He didn't wait for a reply. He vanished from the balcony in a yellow flash, reappearing on the beach between Onagumo and the city. Your fight is with me. Naruto roared, his body exploding in a cloak of golden, bubbling chakra, Kurama's power surging to the surface. I know, the abomination rasped. It charged, its movements a horrifying blend of a marine vice admiral's disciplined rokushiki and the feral, unpredictable lunges of a beast. The battle ensued was unlike any Naruto had fought before. Onagumo was a juggernaut. He was physically powerful, his strikes capable of cracking the very bedrock of the island. But his true weapon was the aura of the null. Every clash was a battle of attrition. When Naruto blocked a sword strike with a chakra-coated arm, he could feel the null's energy trying to eat away at his defenses, a constant, parasitic drain that Kurama had to actively fight back. Hancock and her sisters arrived, ignoring his orders to stay back. Hancock launched her slave arrow, a massive projectile of pink, petrifying energy. But like the Kuja's arrows, it disintegrated as it entered Onagumo's aura of decay. Sandersonia and Marigold attacked from the flanks, their hockey-coated hair and fists slamming into the corrupted Marine. He barely flinched, and the sisters recoiled, crying out as they felt the strength being sapped from their limbs where they'd made contact. Naruto was being pushed back. He was faster, more skilled, but Onagumo was a tank of pure negative energy. And worse, every patch of ground he walked on, every rock he touched, died. A creeping gray wasteland was spreading from the beach, consuming the vibrant jungle. Naruto realized with a sickening certainty that even if he won, the island might not survive. He couldn't win a battle of pure power here. Not without unleashing techniques that would destroy the very home he was trying to protect. He needed a new strategy. He needed experts. Back in the prison, Kaku and his agents had felt the shockwaves of the battle. The stone walls trembled, and the raw, unholy energy of the null washed over them, a feeling so alien and wrong it made even their hardened souls recoil. "What is that power?" the cat-masked agent, Khalifa, asked, her professional calm finally breaking. "It feels like the end of the world." Kaku's eyes were narrowed, his analytical mind working furiously. "It is a corruption, a weaponization of an unknown energy. It is using a bastardized form of Rokushiki, but amplified to an obscene degree." He stood up, testing his sea stone cuffs. They held firm. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this entity was a threat far greater than Naruto Uzumaki. This was a world-ending plague, and they were sitting in a cage, waiting for it to consume them. The battle on the beach was turning desperate. Naruto created 1,000 shadow clones, swarming Onagumo in a massive, chaotic dogpile. The clones were destroyed by the dozens, their chakra dissolving on contact with the null's aura, but they were buying him time. Precious seconds. In a yellow flash, the real Naruto appeared back in the prison chamber. He was breathing heavily, the golden chakra cloak flickering around him. He looked directly at Kaku, his expression grim and resolute. "I need your help," he said, the words costing him a visible effort. Hancock flashed in beside him, her face a mask of fury. "Naruto, what are you doing? You cannot trust them." Naruto ignored her for a moment. His eyes locked on Kaku. "That thing out there is a fusion. A Marine Vice Admiral's body and skills, powered by an entity that consumes life. It uses Rokushiki. I can't get close without my energy being drained. And he's destroying the island just by being here. I need to know the weaknesses of the 6 powers. I need fighters who can match his speed and create an opening for me to get to the parasite inside him without killing the man. Your team is the only option." He then turned to Hancock, his voice softening but losing none of its urgency. "Hancock, I know you hate them. I do too, but my clones can't hold him for long. We either fight this thing together, or we watch it turn your home into a gray desert. There is no other choice." The sheer, brutal logic of his words hung in the air. Kaku, the ultimate pragmatist, saw it instantly. His mission was irrelevant in the face of annihilation. His duty to the world government now meant understanding and, if possible, containing this new, horrifying threat. Survival was the mission. Hancock was torn. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to kill these men, the symbols of her trauma. But the image of her warriors collapsing, their life force stolen, was burned into her mind. She looked at Naruto's face, saw the desperate certainty there, and knew he was right. Her hatred was a luxury she could no longer afford. "What's the plan?" Kaku asked, his voice cutting through the tension. It was an acceptance. Naruto didn't hesitate. "I can suppress the sea stone's effect on you, but I'm leaving the cuffs on. A sign of good faith. You fight with us. You help us take him down. When it's over, we go back to being enemies. You have my word that if we survive this, I will let you and your conscious agents leave this island. You can go back and report what you saw. Tell the Gorosei who the real enemy is." He placed his hands on Kaku's cuffs. A surge of his own chakra enveloped the sea stone, creating a barrier that negated its energy-draining effect on the CP0 agent. Kaku felt his strength return in a flood. Naruto did the same for the other 5. "You would trust us?" the bull-masked agent, Bluno, asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. I don't trust you, Naruto replied, his blue eyes hard as ice. But I'm betting that you're smart enough to want to live, and professional enough to recognize a threat that could destroy your masters and everything you work for. Kaku stood, rolling his shoulders. He looked at his unit, then at Naruto and the furious Empress beside him. A grim, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. This was the most insane situation he had ever been in. A temporary alliance against a common existential threat, Kaku stated, his voice ringing with the finality of a command. Acceptable terms. CP0 will assist. The door to the chamber opened. Outside, the Kuja's elite warriors, the Gorgon sisters, and Marguerite stood, weapons ready, their faces a mixture of hatred and confusion. They had been listening. Naruto walked out to face them, Kaku and his unfettered, though still cuffed, unit right behind him. Two opposing forces, mortal enemies, now standing shoulder to shoulder. In the distance, the monstrous roar of the corrupted Onagumo echoed as he tore through the last of the shadow clones. Let's go to work, Naruto said. The unholy alliance was formed. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Sage and the Void. There was no formal declaration, no shouted agreement. The alliance was sealed in a shared glance of grim necessity between Naruto and Kaku. One moment they were mortal enemies in a prison cell. The next, they were a singular, multifaceted weapon aimed at the heart of the abomination laying waste to the island. They moved as one. Naruto was a golden comet, the first to erupt from the palace and streak towards the blighted coastline. The 6 CP0 agents followed, their white suits a stark contrast to the encroaching gray decay as they used Geppo to bound through the air with silent, inhuman grace. Hancock, her sisters, and the elite of the Kuja warriors were a wave of righteous fury right behind them, their battle cries a sharp counterpoint to the eerie silence of the dying jungle. The scene on the beach was a vision of hell. The vibrant greens and blues of the shore had been leached away, replaced by a monochromatic wasteland of gray sand and black, oily water. The corrupted Onagumo stood in the center of it, a pulsating nexus of death, the last of Naruto's shadow clones dissolving into nothingness around him. He turned his dead, white eyes towards the approaching force. A low, grating sound that might have been a laugh rumbling in his chest. He's using the clones' dissipated chakra to fuel his aura. Naruto shouted, the tactical realization hitting him like a physical blow. No more large-scale clone diversions. We have to be precise. Kaku, landing gracefully on a patch of still-living grass at the edge of the decay, immediate. Ely took up the role of tactical officer. His analytical mind, free from the emotional turmoil that gripped the Kuja, processed the battlefield with cold efficiency. His Rokushiki is a corruption of the art, Kaku called out. His voice sharp and clear, cutting through the chaos. He is sacrificing form for raw power. His movements are telegraphed. Look for the gathering of negative energy before he strikes. Khalifa, Bluno, you're on containment and rescue. Jabra, Fukuro, Kumadori, you are the distraction. We create the opening. Uzumaki is the spear. It was a masterful, instantaneous assessment that Naruto immediately understood. The battle began not as a chaotic brawl, but as a complex, deadly chess match. Roar of the void, Onagumo shrieked, unleashing a massive, sweeping blade of black energy from his sword. A twisted version of Rankyaku. Disperse. 3-point pattern. Kaku commanded. His agents moved with the instinct of a perfectly drilled unit. The Kuja, following their lead, broke formation. The deathly air blade scything through the space where they had been, carving a deep, dead trench in the earth behind them. Then, the counterattack began. Jabra, the wolf-masked agent, was a blur of motion. His Soru carrying him in a dizzying, unpredictable pattern around Onagumo's flank. He didn't try to strike. He was simply a gnat, a distraction forcing the abomination to turn, to divide its attention. Kumadori, the large, kabuki-like agent, used his own prehensile hair to whip at Onagumo's legs, another minor but irritating front. Hancock and her sisters engaged from a distance. Arrows of pink energy and whips of hockey-infused hair lashed out, forcing Onagumo to raise his free hand to create a shield of churning, negative energy. These were not attacks meant to land, they were attacks meant to pin him. To control the battlefield, his center of gravity is shifting left. He's preparing a piercing attack. Kaku's voice rang out. Fukuro. Now. The large, owl-like Agent zipped forward and unhinged his jaw, letting out a concussive blast of sound. The shockwave hit Onagumo, not strong enough to harm him but enough to make him falter for a split second. That was the opening. Naruto, cloaked in his golden Kurama shroud, moved. He wasn't aiming for Onagumo himself. He appeared at the monster's side and slammed a Rasengan not into his body, but into the ground at his feet. The earth erupted, throwing the corrupted Vice Admiral off balance. For a single, crucial moment, his defensive aura flickered. Kaku seized that moment. He appeared directly in front of Onagumo, his right hand held open. Fingers together like a spearhead. Rokuogen, he yelled, thrusting his fist forward. It was the ultimate secret art of the Rokushiki, a technique that turned the user's own physical power into a devastating internal shockwave. The blow landed squarely on Onagumo's chest. The monster was thrown back, skidding across the gray sand, a visible ripple of force distorting the air around him. It was the first clean, significant blow that had been landed. But it was not without cost. Kaku recoiled, his arm trembling, his breath hissing through his teeth. The brief contact with the null's aura had leached his strength, a freezing cold shooting up his arm. Before Onagumo could recover, a shimmering, rectangular window of air opened in front of Kaku. Bluno, the bull-masked agent, reached through his air door from 50 yards away and pulled his leader back to safety. At the same moment, Khalifa, the cat-masked agent, swiped her hands through the air, and the ND where Kaku had been standing was suddenly coated in a slick, frictionless layer of soap. It was a symphony of chaos, a perfectly executed maneuver by a team of mortal enemies. The Kuja provided covering fire. The CP0 agents created openings and performed rescues. And Naruto acted as the battering ram, the only one whose raw power could momentarily disrupt the null's defense. The abomination rose to its feet. The imprint of Kaku's fist on its chest already healing as black veins pulsed, drawing energy not from its own body, but from the island itself. They could feel it, a collective psyche, grown from the very land they stood upon, as its life force was siphoned away at an alarming rate. The gray decay was spreading faster, the leaves on the trees at the jungle's edge visibly crumbling to dust. Games. Onagumo roared, his rage escalating. He slammed all 6 of his swords, now drawn and coated in black energy, into the ground. This world is a font of decay. I will drink it dry. The black, pulsating veins that covered his body shot out from him, burrowing into the ground like grotesque roots. The draining effect intensified 100-fold. The sky, once a clear blue, began to darken as if a storm were brewing. The very air grew thin and cold. Kuja warriors at the edge of the fight cried out and collapsed, not from injury, but from sheer, debilitating exhaustion as the life was leached from them. He's tethered himself to the island's life force. Elder Nyan screamed from a safe vantage point. He is turning our home into his battery. Bluno and Khalifa worked frantically, opening air doors to pull the collapsed warriors back from the front line, but they couldn't keep up. The radius of the draining aura was expanding with every second. The plan isn't working, Hancock shouted, her face pale with strain as she poured her haki into another attack that did little more than annoy their foe. We are all going to be husks before we can wear him down. Naruto knew she was right. Their precision tactics were brilliant, but they were a scalpel against an ever-expanding cancer. Attrition was not an option when their very battlefield was being eaten alive. He had to end it. Now, he flashed over to Kaku, who was shaking out the freezing numbness in his arm. New plan. It's insane, but it's all I've got. I am beginning to expect nothing less from you, Kaku replied, his voice a dry rasp. I need to get inside his head. A psychic dive, like I did with the Kuja warrior. But his mental defenses are a fortress. The null entity is completely in control. I can't break through while he's fighting back. I need an opening, a perfect one. I need you to hold him, his body and his will, completely still. For 5 seconds, Kaku stared at him, the full, suicidal insanity of the request sinking in. Hold that thing still, a being that shrugged off a Rokuogen and was drinking an island dry. It was impossible, it was a death sentence. 5 seconds, Naruto repeated, his gaze unwavering. That's all I need to save this island. Can you give them to me? Kaku looked from Naruto's determined face to the spreading gray death that was consuming the jungle, then to his own agents. who were now fighting a desperate defensive action. His mission had been to measure a monster. His new mission was to stop an apocalypse. Logic, pride, and protocol were irrelevant. Only the outcome mattered. He took a deep breath. We can. He turned to the others. You heard him. We are no longer distracting. We are binding all power to a single, coordinated strike. The goal is not to wound, but to paralyze. On my mark. Kaku became the eye of the storm. Hancock, your strongest petrification attack. Sisters, full beast transformation, bind his limbs. Kuja, do not aim for him, aim for the ground at his feet. We will shatter his footing. CP0, we will strike as one. Prepare for the final technique. It was a desperate, final gambit. Hancock poured every ounce of her will into her next attack. Perfume femur, she screamed, launching a storm of kicks that sent dozens of massive, arrow-headed projectiles of stone-turning energy at Onagumo. Sandersonia and Marigold roared as they transformed, their massive snake bodies surging forward, ignoring the life-draining aura as they coiled around Onagumo's legs and torso, their scales smoking and cracking on contact. The pain was immense, but they held on. Their muscles straining, hundreds of hockey-infused arrows rained down, not on Onagumo, but on the rock around him, shattering his foundation, turning the ground into a treacherous pit of rubble. And then came Cypher Pole. The 4 remaining combat agents blurred, appearing at the 4 cardinal points around the struggling Onagumo. They moved in perfect, deadly sync, their hands held ready. Ultimate Art. Rokuogan Armada. Kaku commanded. 4 simultaneous shockwaves, 4 internal explosions of devastating power, struck Onagumo from 4 different directions at the exact same instant. The abomination roared, a sound of pure agony, as his body was racked by the competing forces. His own corrupting aura sputtered. His connection to the island flickered. He was stunned, paralyzed. It was the opening, but it wouldn't last. The sisters were screaming, their bodies being actively consumed by the null. The CP0 agents were staggering, the backlash from their ultimate attack and the proximity to the aura nearly overwhelming them. Now, Uzumaki. Kaku roared, blood streaming from his mouth. Naruto was already there. He had activated his full 6 paths Sage mode, his body alight with divine, golden energy. The truth-seeking orbs materializing behind him. He pressed his palm against Onagumo's forehead. 6 paths. Psychic dive. The world outside vanished. He was plunged into a maelstrom. Onagumo's mind was a black, stormy ocean under a starless sky. The waves were made of pure humiliation, the rain a downpour of acidic hatred. In the distance, spectral images of the destroyed marine fleet burned on the horizon. And at the center of the storm, a colossal, swirling vortex of absolute nothingness, the null entity, now a sentient tempest. Deep within its churning depths, a tiny, screaming ember of light was all that remained of Vice Admiral Onagumo's true soul. Naruto's spiritual form, a being of pure, golden light, stood on the surface of the black water. The error, a thought of pure malice boomed from the vortex, a voice that was not Onagumo's but something far older, far colder. The anomaly, the cancer of life, the vortex pulsed, and an image was projected directly into Naruto's consciousness. He stood before a colossal throne, carved from a material that was the absence of light itself. On the throne sat a being, cloaked in robes of silent, shifting void. The Silent King. It had no face, no features, only a profound, universe-ending emptiness. I am the purity of the end, the king's thoughts echoed, not with sound, but with the chilling weight of absolute truth. The silence between the stars. All realities eventually fade into my peace. Yours is a noisy, offensive aberration. You do not die, you spread, you create. You are a cosmic mistake. I am the correction. This thing wasn't just a conqueror. It was a fundamental force, the entropy of all creation. It saw life itself as a disease. And it saw Naruto, a being overflowing with life energy. A conduit of creation itself, as the ultimate pathogen. Your light is an insult to my darkness, the king's presence conveyed through the null. I will unmake your world. I will begin with this tiny, insignificant one you have infected. I will purge your presence from all of existence. Naruto stared into the heart of the void, into the will of a being that considered galaxies to be fleeting distractions. He felt the crushing weight of its cosmic nihilism, a despair so profound it could snuff out suns. But he was Naruto Uzumaki. His will had been forged in the fires of a lonely childhood, tempered by the bonds of friendship, and honed into a weapon that had defied fate itself. He held up his spiritual hand. My light might be an insult to you, his own thought blazed back. A defiant sun against the endless night. But your darkness is boring as hell. He didn't just form a Rasengan. He became one. He pulled on the very concept of life, of hope, of connection, power given to him by Hagoromo Otsutsuki. He became a star of pure, positive, creative energy. Sage art. Genesis Rasengan. He plunged this star, this concentrated essence of life itself, into the heart of the null vortex. There was a silent scream that tore through the psychic plane. It was the shriek of absolute nothingness encountering its absolute opposite. The black ocean of Onagumo's mind boiled, turning to steam. The null entity, the maelstrom of void, was not destroyed, but it was violently, completely severed from its host. Naruto felt it being flung back through the dimensions, a psychic thread snapping. Back towards the silent, waiting throne in the void. The psychic backlash was catastrophic. The severing of the connection sent a shockwave that slammed into Naruto's spiritual form. He felt a pain beyond pain, an exhaustion that threatened to unmake his very soul. His consciousness snapped back to his body. He fell to his knees, the six paths sage mode dissipating, leaving him pale and trembling. The world swam back into focus. Before him, the corrupted Onaguma was shrinking. The black veins receded into his skin, the monstrous musculature deflated, and the six swords of black energy dissolved into smoke. He collapsed, no longer an abomination, but a man once more, unconscious but breathing. The oppressive, life-draining aura was gone. The island took a shuddering breath. The blackened water began to clear. The gray sand lightened. A faint, green blush, the first hint of returning life, appeared on the leaves of the nearest tree. They had won. The Gorgon sisters reverted to their human forms. Covered in smoking burns but alive. The CP0 agents were on their knees, panting, drained, but victorious. Hancock rushed to Naruto's side, her earlier fury forgotten, her face a mask of desperate concern. Kaku, his ribs certainly broken, pushed himself to his feet. He looked at the unconscious form of Onagumo, then at the devastation around them. Finally, his gaze settled on Naruto, who was being helped up by Hancock. He had seen the truth. He had seen a power that didn't just defeat its enemies, but could reach into their very souls and purge the darkness within. He had heard the promise of a war against a literal god of emptiness. His neat, orderly world of governments and secret missions had been irrevocably shattered. The unholy alliance had been a success. The immediate threat was over. But as the sun began to break through the unnaturally dark clouds, a new, far more terrifying reality settled over them all. The battle for Amazon Lily was over. He war for existence itself had just been declared. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. A New Emperor's Dawn. Victory was silent. It did not taste of triumph, but of ash and exhaustion. The first rays of dawn painted the scarred battlefield in pale, watery colors, revealing the true cost of their survival. The gray wasteland on the beach was slowly, miraculously, receding, but the damage was immense. Kuja W. Arriers lay scattered across the battlefield, not dead, but drained to the point of collapse, their faces gaunt, their breathing shallow. The Gorgon sisters were being tended to by healers, their powerful bodies covered in ugly, weeping burns from their direct contact with the null's aura. And at the center of it all, two groups of mortal enemies stood in a tense, unspoken truce, separated by a yards of torn earth and a chasm of ideology. Naruto, supported by Hancock's unyielding grip on his arm, surveyed the scene, a bone-deep weariness settling into his very soul. The psychic backlash Fr. Own confronting the Silent King was a far deeper wound than any physical injury. It was a cold echo in the back of his mind, a whisper of absolute, cosmic despair. Kaku stood with his remaining CP0 agents. They were bruised, battered, and utterly spent, their immaculate white suits now rags of gray and crimson. They looked at the Kuja, at Naruto, and at the unconscious form of Vice Admiral Onagumo being bound by Kuja medics. And their faces were masks of profound, paradigm-shifting conflict. Everything they thought they knew about the world, its threats, and its protectors had been immolated in the heat of the last hour. It was Kaku who broke the silence, his voice a low rasp. The terms of our agreement. It wasn't a question, but a statement, a test. Naruto met his gaze. Despite her exhaustion, Hancock's grip on his arm tightened, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Her hatred for these men had not vanished, it had merely been suppressed by necessity. A deal's a deal, Naruto said, his voice steady despite the fatigue. He pushed himself upright, standing on his own. Your comrades who are still conscious can leave. Take a boat. The ones I knocked out will wake up in a few hours. They can leave then. As for Onagumo, he looked at the former vice admiral, now just a broken man. He's your problem. He's a victim as much as anyone here. Take him with you. Kaku gave a single, sharp nod of acknowledgement. There was no gratitude, only the professional respect of one combatant for another. My report to the 5 elders will be complicated. Make it accurate, Naruto said. Tell them the truth. Tell them there's a real monster out there, and it's not me. Tell them a war between us is exactly what it wants. The world government is an institution of order, Kaku stated, his eyes holding a new, complex depth. That thing, and the entity it serves are the antithesis of order. They are a plague of chaos. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the combined force of Kuja and Shish. A Nobi that had stood against the apocalypse. My report will reflect the strategic necessity of reassessing the primary threats to global stability. It was a masterfully vague, politically sharp response. He wasn't promising peace. He wasn't declaring friendship. He was a pragmatist, and he now understood that aiming his weapon at Naruto was like trying to shoot a guard dog while a planet-eating tiger was clawing at the door. With a final, shared look of understanding, the CP0 agents gathered their unconscious comrades and the still-breathing body of Onagumo. The Kuja warriors parted for them. Their spears held low but their eyes filled with a venomous hatred that promised death should this truce ever be broken. The agents of Cypher Pole walked away from the battle, not as victors or losers, but as messengers. Carrying a truth so vast and terrifying it would shake the foundations of their world. As they disappeared into the jungle towards the docks, Hancock finally turned to Naruto, her face a storm of conflicting emotions. You just let them go. After they invaded our home. After everything their kind has done. Revenge won't heal this island, Hancock, Naruto said softly, Gestu. Ring to the collapsed warriors and the blighted land. He walked over to the edge of the dead zone, where gray sand met the first struggling blades of green grass. He knelt, placing his palm flat against the dead earth. A warm, gentle wave of 6 paths life energy flowed from him, not with the explosive force of a jutsu, but with the nurturing patience of spring rain. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. Where his hand rested, a vibrant, impossible green spread out like a ripple in a pond. The gray sand regained its color, turning to rich, brown soil. The grass thickened, and from the ground, small, multicolored flowers bloomed, their petals unfurling in a matter of seconds. He moved his hand, and the wave of life followed, chasing the gray decay back into the sea, reclaiming the land inch by miraculous inch. The Kuja, even the healers tending to the fallen, stopped and stared in silent, reverent awe. They had witnessed his power as a destructive storm. Now they were witnessing it as a creative dawn. He was not just their shield. He was their heart, capable of healing the wounds of their home with a single touch. Hancock watched him, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. The man she was falling in love with was not a weapon. He was a force of nature. He was life itself. The anger she felt towards CP0, the burning need for vengeance, felt petty and small in the face of such profound restorative power. He was right. Healing was more important than hate. The next few days were a blur of activity. The island, under Hancock's firm and decisive command, began to rebuild. The less affected warriors cared for the more severely drained. Their community spirit, once fractured by the suspicion surrounding Naruto, now forged into an unbreakable bond of shared survival. Naruto, though still recovering his own spiritual energy, worked tirelessly alongside them. He moved from warrior to warrior, his gentle, life-giving chakra accelerating their recovery, easing their pain. He was no longer an outsider. He had bled for their home. He had purged the darkness from their sister. He had healed their very land. He was, in every sense of the word, one of them. The world, however, was not silent. About a week after the battle, a news coup, a rare sight in the calm belt, made a beeline for Amazon Lily. It carried the latest edition of the World Economic Journal. Hancock unfurled the paper in the palace courtyard, where Naruto and a recovering Marguerite were sharing a meal. The headline was explosive, taking up half the front page in bold, stark lettering. CP0 unit decimated on Amazon Lily. Fifth Emperor solidifies reign of terror. The article, penned by the ever-sensational Morgans, was a masterpiece of speculation and dramatic flair. It spoke of a second, even more disastrous government incursion into the territory of the Whirlpool Demon. It quoted anonymous, terrified marine sources who spoke of an energy signature so vast it had been detected halfway across the Grand Line, a battle that had darkened the very sky. While the details were wrong, twisted to paint Naruto as a volatile, destructive tyrant, the conclusion was the same. He was an undeniable, world-shaking power. The title of emperor was no longer a sensationalist claim. It was an established fact. Marguerite looked from the paper to Naruto, her eyes wide with awe. An emperor? They truly see you as an equal to Kaido and Big Mom. Naruto just sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Great. More paperwork, probably. His attempt at a joke fell flat. The name carried a weight he never wanted. It was a crown of thorns, a declaration that he could never again know a moment's true peace. Hancock, however, rolled up the paper, a fierce, triumphant fire in her eyes. Let them call you a demon. Let them call you a tyrant, she said, her voice ringing with a possessive pride that made every Kuja in the courtyard stand a little taller. They can call you whatever they wish. But they will call you emperor. And they will know that this island, my home, is the heart of an emperor's territory. They will never dare to set foot here uninvited again. She was right. The world was now on notice. Amazon Lily was no longer a secret, isolated nation. It was the capital of a new empire, defended not by a treaty, but by a single man whose power could challenge the heavens. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the sky in brilliant strokes of orange and violet, Naruto stood on the high cliffside balcony, the place where his new life had truly begun. The island below was a patchwork of green and gold, the scars of the battle already fading under his touch and the tireless work of the Kuja. The sounds of the city were no longer ones of fear or suspicion, but of life. Of laughter, of rebuilding. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Hancock approaching, a simple silk robe flowing around her in the gentle sea breeze. She came to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing against his. They stood in a comfortable silence for a long time, watching the stars begin to prick the darkening sky. I spent so long, Naruto began, his voice quiet, reflective. Just looking for a way back. A way home. And what do you see now? Hancock asked, her voice just as soft, when you look forward. Naruto didn't look out at the sea, at the impossibly distant horizon. He looked at the island, at the warm lights of the city, at the faces of the people he now knew by name. He looked at Marguerite, who was laughing with her friends in the training yard below. He looked at Sandersonia and Marigold, who were arguing good-naturedly over a spear polishing technique. Then, he looked at Hancock, at the beautiful, powerful, and brilliantly resilient woman standing beside him. Her dark eyes reflecting the starlight, filled with an emotion he was finally beginning to understand and accept. Home, he answered, the single word filled with a profound and final acceptance. The desperate, grieving shinobi who had washed ashore on this island was gone. The boy who had fought to be acknowledged by a village that scorned him had faded into memory. He was no longer just a protector or a guest or a strange anomaly. This was his place. These were his people. This was his life now. Hancock's hand found his, her fingers lacing with his own. It was a simple, quiet gesture that spoke volumes more than any declaration. It was a promise of a shared future, of a shared throne, of a shared life. He was Naruto Uzumaki, the sage of Amazon Lily, the fifth emperor of the sea. He had a home to protect, a family to love, and a silent, cosmic king cloaked in the endless void to prepare for. The war for his old world was over. The war for his new one, and for all of existence, was just beginning. And for the first time since he had been ripped from his reality, as he stood beside his queen and looked out upon his kingdom, he felt ready for it. The sun had set, but this was not an ending. It was a new emperor's dawn. Chapter 10 End.